Welcome back, movie lovers. Thank you for coming to another installment of Cinematic Realms. We're a little early today. I'm your host, John Webster, and with me, as usual, is my co host. And she's not so much in training anymore. She's just becoming a full fledged cinephile, Amy Blackfire.
Hello, everyone.
How you doing, Amy? Nothing going on today, is
No,
there?
there's no reason at all to be excited or relieved or anything. It's just a normal Saturday, nothing going on.
Yeah, so we're early today because we didn't want to be speaking later tonight when the president-elect is giving his speech along with the vice president-elect. We're going to be
Madam Vice President-elect.
Yes, we're going to be very excited to hear that. So we're doing this early. And yeah, we're talking about the films of Quentin Tarantino. And what's weird, Amy, is that we packed in all these viewings this week. And while not true for all of the films, a lot of the films felt like they were extremely relevant. And
yeah. At the time, they felt relevant. And we also, in addition to that, watched V for Vendetta, which also kind of was a lot. And, you know, while I am glad that we're going to do the stream earlier so that I can catch this historical moment, especially for women and women of color in particular, it does mean that I'm not quite ready to drink yet. So my drink for the patriarchy drinking game today is some iced coffee. So that's what we're going to have to do today. I've got a special bottle of wine I'm going to open for the speech later. So I'm excited for that.
So really excited to see you guys. Sorry you can't stick around, Stephen, but thank you for dropping by. And yeah, so we're just going to have a bunch of fun today. This is actually the continuation of our Focus On series, which it's only our
totally didn't start because we love Kira and wanted to talk about her only for 3 hours. That's not at all the origins of this series, John.
That was so funny because when I did that, I was like, yes, this is the start of a new series. And that was complete BS. That was just so we could do an entire episode all about Kira.
Yeah, so this is our second Focus On series, and we have quite a list going of directors, costume designers, actors, maybe even some also musical, oh gosh, what am I looking for? The people that do the music in the movies. I'm totally messing that up. But yeah, we want to focus specifically on one person and kind of their work, their filmography. And so, yeah, we did, of course, our queen, Keira Knightley first, and today we're going to do someone who we both really, really love to talk about in the movies we love, which is Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah, and what's funny is because we had to choose the movies that we were... Oh, wait, you know what? I need to stop for a sec because I just saw this. Yeah, that's
guilty.
That's some pressure.
I see him all over different streams. He's nice.
Okay, cool.
I don't mean to assume you're gender guilty. You could be non-binary or female. I'm sorry.
But yeah, so anyway, what I was saying was it's funny because we actually mostly agreed on the movies we were going to focus on, which was why there was only one of my choices where you wanted to go for something else. I was like, you're letting me have like 4 out of my 5 choices. I think... I think we can go for it. So we're actually covering both volumes of Kill Bill, Inglourious Basterds, Django Unchained, and The Hateful Eight, which is great, especially with Kill Bill, because those were my first Quentin Tarantino films. I saw the first Kill Bill because my friends from work basically dragged me to it one night after we were working, and I wasn't a fan of Tarantino, and I had seen the previews for it, and I was like, this movie just looked so stupid. Because he has a weird style. But
yeah, definitely. Quentin had to grow on me for sure.
But I ended up absolutely falling in love with it. I'm curious, what was the first film of his that you saw?
It was actually Kill Bill as well, and my second was Pulp Fiction. I had heard about all of these movies, but I actually remember so a lot of people talk about back in the day when you would go to Blockbuster, especially when I was a kid, I would go to Blockbuster and everyone would be like, oh, my mom would not let me rent that because it had violence. Like, my mom was really chill, and pretty much anything, unless it was like really, really, like, I think Kill Bill is it rated R, or it must be, yeah. And so I thought my mom's not going to say yes to this, but I was like, look, Mom, I want to, and she's like, sure. And she rented it for me. So that was how I was able to rent it, because kids couldn't really rated R. So yeah, I rented it in Blockbuster. And I, at the time, was an anime fan. And so I automatically liked it because of the kind of Japanese aesthetic it had going on. So that was my first Tarantino film. And then after that was Pulp Fiction, which we disagree on quite a bit. But then after that, I just started watching anything I could with Tarantino. And as we talked about in the Hero stream, he also has presented other excellent directors such as Zhang Yimou's films as well.
Yeah, and Anna brings up that Kill Bill takes a lot from a Japanese film, and I think she's referring to Lady Snowblood, which I know, if not the plot, because I haven't seen the full film, but stylistically, there's a lot of stuff from that film. And yes, I own the Criterion Collection Blu-ray of that film, because physical media.
Physical media? Wow, I had no idea that you were into physical media, John. But I think that the style of Tarantino, what at first, for me, I didn't care for, and I had to grow on me, but I think it was the dialogue that kept me watching more than anything. The dialogue in Tarantino's movies he has such great one-liners and such impactful characters, really, like when they're discussing things together, right? Like we were talking about Hateful Eight, there are some moments of action, but otherwise it's just like monologuing and like discussion and two characters talking to each other. But there's always this tension going on. The conversation is never just a conversation in a Tarantino film. It's always building to something. He has the build up and the payoff, which is so important for literary analysis and also for cinema.
Yeah, I mean, all of his films are basically just like, you could just go on and on about the lines, the dialogue. I think our watch parties were pretty much just typing out all the dialogue, because it's so much fun. And with Kill Bill, especially the first one, it's actually a little bit different from some of his other films, because there's a lot of reference in not just the style of the movie, but in the dialogue to Japanese cinema.
Yeah.
And I mean, those movies are basically his homage to that. Kill Bill 2 is also heavily influenced by spaghetti westerns and stuff. So, but I remember seeing Kill Bill Volume 1, it was the first Tarantino anything I saw, and just being bombarded with all this really cool, like, these speeches about honor, and it felt steeped in Japanese cinema, and I think that's what pulled me into it. Not to mention, there's a point you get to where it's just a full-on Japanese animation.
Yeah, and you get the feeling that Tarantino, like with Django Unchained and Hateful Eight, that's what he wants westerns to be, right? And Kill Bill is kind of his homage to, the first part is very much an homage to Japanese cinema, but then you have in part 2, when she meets the master Pai Mei, that's absolutely his tribute to wushu films, to Chinese martial arts films. So we have a lot of mixing of different Asian cultures, and we also have one of my favorite parts in part 2, where Pai Mei asks the bride, the main character, Uma Thurman, right, what she's learned, and she goes, "Oh, I know this, the way of the samurai sword." And he goes, "I hate the Japs." And so there is this like fighting of Japanese samurai films and then Chinese martial arts films. It's kind of a tension in the second part that I really enjoy. And unfortunately, he was speaking in Cantonese and not Mandarin, so I did have to read the subtitles. But otherwise, did you know this, John? I could have watched it without the subtitles if it was in Mandarin.
I did not know this, Amy. do you know things about Chinese culture and language and
Just a little bit. Yeah, no.
okay.
Just getting my PhD in it, no big deal. But I think that that's, when I was watching especially part 2, it really felt like a huge homage to Tarantino's love of these kinds of martial arts films, just as there's lots of homages to, like you were saying, these spaghetti westerns. So you really kind of feel like what Tarantino loved growing up, it's like once he became an adult, he could finally produce his version of that. That was a spin on it, but also at the same time kind of honoring some of the important themes in it. And I think he got a lot out of these movies. And this is very common in the West to get a lot out of martial arts films, Wu-Tang Clan, Wu-Tang Forever. Anyway, there are a lot of Westerners, including myself, who get a lot out of movies from the East.
Yeah, so I do want to shift back to Kill Bill Volume 1 to start off with that. Obviously, we can't go as much as I would love to go through detail like every scene of these movies. We have a lot of movies to cover in this stream, so. But I feel like we are going to spend the bulk of this first hour on Kill Bill. The way that movie opens up, I remember seeing it in theaters, and it's just because it starts in black. You've got some opening text, but you just hear Uma Thurman's character, the bride, breathing heavy, and that could be any number of things. And I think it's sort of shocking when, the picture comes up and it's in black and white, and it's her bloody face, and she's just absolutely terrified, and you've got Bill walking up to her, and the first line of dialogue is, "Do you find me sadistic?" It's just so chilling. And we talked about this, that there's a difference in the way that Tarantino portrays violence in his films. I think when he wants you to really feel the emotional impact and gravitas for like the characters that you're meant to really care about, his violence is real. It's not sugar-coated, and yet when then that person is unleashing vengeance, getting revenge, then the violence shifts over to the cartoonish and fun, and where you can kind of laugh along with it.
Yeah, and it becomes comical with the blood spurting everywhere. And we'll, of course, talk about this when we get to Django Unchained, and you'll see that this is a running theme throughout Tarantino's films. But what I think is also interesting, John, is we can also look at it as whenever violence is particularly being done towards women, in this case, the bride, it's very serious. And when she's fighting people to get revenge for that violence done against her, then that is when it's kind of comical. And so there's a huge theme of revenge in really all of Tarantino's films. But I mean, it's literally called Kill Bill. The name is about her, the revenge that she wants to get. But I think that, and, well, obviously I'm going to talk a lot about the patriarchy, but we have a woman who was wronged by this man who she put all of this trust in, and who she thought that she was his protege and starting to become his equal. And I think that what he did to her shows that men will never fully let women become their equal, right? He has all of these women under her, like Lucy Liu's character. And then, the first one that she fights with, who has the little daughter. You have all of these women under this man who he's giving them just enough, teaching them just enough martial arts for them to be competent fighters, but never fully allowing them to be themselves. And they're always doing Bill's bidding. And that's why you can do a lot of feminist analysis, seeing it as Kill Bill is actually kill the patriarchy. And I'll go ahead and drink now. Cheers, chat.
I'm sorry. I am not surprised at all that that's your.
Can you believe that's my take on this movie? I mean, duh. I love martial arts movies. Don't get me wrong. But Kill Bill Part 2, when she talks to Pai Mei, the master, gets even more obvious. But we'll talk about that
soon. I feel like I have to launch immediately into talking about the music in Tarantino, because even from the start of his filmography with Reservoir Dogs. The music is crucially important. I know. I think you haven't seen the film.
Not yet,
film,
no.
right? Well, there's a scene where Michael Madsen plays this sadistic, crazy, guy who's been hired as part of the team, but he's a loose cannon, and they've captured a police officer, and he's torturing him. And he even cuts off his ear at one point, and he turns on the radio and starts dancing to the song "Stuck in the Middle with You." And so the scene becomes strangely fun and comical, even as he's torturing this poor guy. And that's like Tarantino's gift, to make you feel things with the music that maybe you don't want to feel.
Yeah,
but he's just brilliant at it. And the two Kill Bill films are sort of different in the styles of music, whereas in Volume 1, again, it's a lot of callbacks to sort of Japanese cinema and the type of music he uses. When I saw the film, it was like, oh, this stuff is awesome. It's like fist pumping and stuff. And then Volume 2, he goes into largely the music of a composer, Ennio Morricone, with the spaghetti Western music. And it's all equally brilliant.
Yeah, and what I like, and we were talking about this when we were watching Hateful Eight, is that he uses those comical moments, but he also uses silence very effectively, especially in his more obviously modeled after Western ones. But what I like too is, and this is very common in Japanese cinema, where you see the main character react to something and it zooms in on them, and you hear this type of music that you'll then hear throughout the movie that shows like it's about to go down. And for Kill Bill, it's that music, right? And it goes right. And oh my God, Uma, her eyes, just like we talked about with Charlize Theron on our Mad Max Fury Road stream, especially people with blue eyes, like really show that emotion there. And then that music comes in, and you're like, oh, it's going to go down. She's going to get some revenge. So I think that Quentin Tarantino really builds up with music, and you get a lot, but then he'll sometimes cut off the music real quick. And all of this tension, you're just kind of left. It's like you were about to jump off the edge, but then you don't quite get there. And I think that's a lot of him working with your emotion, but it's also very similar to Japanese cinema with these kinds of continuing themes. Just like if you watch the Wonder Woman movie, there's a certain theme that when she comes on screen that comes on, and then when you watch Justice League, that same theme comes whenever Wonder Woman enters the scene.
Yeah, and this isn't a discussion of the Wonder Woman movie, but I could
be.
But I could go on music-wise about the way that theme carries over, because especially because that was composed by, I believe, Hans Zimmer, and I could be wrong about that. It actually could be the other composer who worked on Batman versus Superman, but I'll correct that if we ever get to those movies. But it's got a flavor that's in keeping with Batman versus Superman. But when you get to Wonder Woman, the fact that the score for that film is much more sort of lush and orchestral, and then when you bring in that theme, it's really noticeable.
Yeah.
And it hits. Okay, that's we'll dive
for future Joas.
We'll go back over.
Streams. We're definitely going to do some DC, so don't worry about that.
But yeah, so now I've
lost back to the music of Quentin Tarantino.
But you mentioned that he cuts off the music sometimes startlingly. There you go.
That has a lot of lows in it.
Yeah. There's the
You're a little heavy on the OJ there, John. That's what it is. You're starting to slur your words. Where
she's escaping from the hospital after like probably the most disgusting scene in the whole film. But there's like heavy music playing as she's kind of rolling through the parking garage. And what's cool is that you don't get the same effect on home video, but in the theater, that's when the real change happens. So you got like back when it was film projection, you had those like little dots in the corner of the screen. And as soon as the cut happens and the real change, the music just cut out. And I love that because that's Tarantino sort of nodding to, old school like film and cinema where, there's sometimes a very sudden cut with the real change.
Yeah, and I don't want to sugarcoat that scene in the hospital, because that's probably one of the most obvious points in the movie where we get a complete, utter lack of consent. She is literally comatose and taken advantage of by men. And so I definitely don't want to sugarcoat that. But it's also where we learn that she now can't have children, and she has lost her baby. So it's also a moment of loss of motherhood for her at this point in the movie. For those of you that have seen part 2, that's not quite true. But at this point, it's a loss of motherhood and also a loss of control over one's body at the same time. And I think Tarantino did a really good job. He does something similar in Django Unchained with what happens to Hildy being forced into sex work, where you have this really strong character who loses control over their body and then reclaims it. And I think that that's a very important theme in this movie. And so if we want to take her as kind of this warrior against patriarchy, then this is the first time where she does that with Buck, who's here to F. Like, that guy can F off. Seriously, I can't with that. And then he has the pussy wagon. Oh my God. Like, so many women watching this, though, know that guy, unfortunately. But this is really her. This is her literally defeating him and then taking his property. I mean, it's really obvious this kind of taking back of her own agency.
Now, I don't want to discount how great a job that actor Michael Bowen does, because he plays that part with sort of disgusting glee. But yeah, the character is atrocious, and I remember, like, even when I first saw this, like, it's just so gratifying. First, when she, cuts him at his ankle.
Oh yeah, that's
which is, you flinch away, but it's great to see. And then when she freaking bangs his head in repeatedly,
repeats what the words that she now remembers, now that she's no longer comatose, the things he was saying. But yeah, the way that men use women in Tarantino's films is not just for the ick factor. I really think, obviously, I'm primed to look at these things, but I really think that he's doing something there. And this is also a part of her growth and a part of her taking revenge on the people that hurt her most recently. And she's going to work her way back to 4 years ago, back to the group of people who almost killed her and made her, what she thinks, lose her baby.
Yeah.
So it's like you got to defeat, like in Pokemon, you've got to defeat like the lower members of Team Rocket first before you can get up to the big boss. So Buck is one of those.
It is like a video game.
It really is.
In a way. It does feel that way, of working your way up to the big boss of the game. That's especially how Volume 1 feels especially once she gets to the point of fighting the Crazy 88 and like all of these minions come after her, and then you get to Go-Go and yes. then the bulk of the army, it comes and fights her.
Can I just say, I'm being feminist about this, but oh my God, Uma Thurman fighting Go-Go is one of the hottest scenes. They're such two really good looking women. I'm sorry, I just had to say it. It is just like, I want, obviously we want the bride to win, but I want the battle to be drawn out just so I can see Go-Go in that really cute Japanese school uniform. I'm sorry, but it's like obviously meant to create a little bit of a fantasy, right? The wearing of the school uniform is a big thing. Sorry, but I'll just come out and say it, in Japanese pornography. It's kind of a bit of a wet dream for those attracted to women. So to see her then be this emotionless killing machine is wow. I think it's really Tarantino kind of turning these tropes of the nice Japanese schoolgirl on their head, which we also get with O-Ren when she kills the man who killed her parents. She's in a, you notice it's during the cartoon version, but she's in a Japanese school uniform, right? and he has invited her into his bedroom, thinking that he's a pedophile, thinking that, once again, showing the woman taking back her autonomy, right? And she totally kills him, and she's also in this school uniform. There's very much an idea of fetishization going on in this movie.
Yeah, that. I mean,
it's our first time talking about porn on Joeth here. I'm just breaking. I haven't even been drinking.
That's why I'm just remaining quiet over here, just letting you go all in on it. But the Japanese animation portion of this film is utterly astonishing. I think that's what really sold this movie to me as I was watching it the first time, because up until that point, I remember having a good time watching the movie, but it was just so different from anything I'd seen before, and I wasn't completely sure whether I was into it or not. But then once the film switched over to Japanese animation, I'm like, all right, I get this now. We're just throwing everything out the window, anything goes, but it's so brilliantly done. It's like none of it is done as a joke. It's one of the probably best examples of sort of Japanese animation. It's like brilliantly done.
And it has, as someone who grew up watching anime, it also has that whenever the cartoon characters react, like like all of even the like sound effects and the voice acting is very, very similar to anime. And if I could just first of all, praise Lucy Liu. I mean, she's amazing at this part as Orin Oshii. Yeah, that's the name. But I think probably my favorite aspect of her is she's half Chinese, half Japanese, which especially for a very purist culture like Japan, is a little bit of a taboo. You're not quite considered Japanese enough. And so she's constantly trying to prove herself as, fully Japanese enough to be leading the Yakuza, right? And so you also notice she's the only one wearing white, and all of her minions are wearing masks and they're wearing suits, black suits, right? But she's wearing this very pure virgin kind of outfit, which then later really contrasts well or matches well the snow scene where we see her fighting the bride, right?
Yeah.
And I think also the way that when they first start fighting, you notice that Oren takes off her shoes and does a little bow. So she's keeping with this kind of even, in Japanese culture, when you're about to fight, right, you kind of bow and you show respect toward your opponent. And I think that she's still keeping with these Japanese kinds of, manners, because she is constantly trying to convince herself and everyone else that she is indeed Japanese enough. And I think that's one of the many, many reasons that I think that Lucy Liu was really good for this part, because she is actually Chinese. And by the way, I just got to give a shout out for Lucy Liu. Her Japanese was really good. I was surprised. I was like, because last time I saw it, I didn't know Chinese or Japanese. And so I was like, all right, let's see how this is. By the way, I'm not saying I know Japanese, but I do know what it sounds like. I can read it, but I can't speak it very well. And so when she spoke, I was like, okay, like unless she is a voice actor, then Lucy Liu did her homework for this. And I've heard her speak Mandarin, obviously, very well. But yeah, so I really think that Lucy Liu really put herself fully into this part, and it absolutely comes off the screen as she's a little bit like the queen from Kingdom, which is available on Netflix. It's a Korean zombie show where she's bad, but at the same time she's so striking, and something about her makes you want to you not like root for her, but kind of follow her and have sympathy for her.
Well, that's actually what I think is really great about Volume 1, is that as much as it is I was going to say the bride, but we're talking about all the movies, so I'm just going to go ahead and call her Beatrix, because we know that's her name. It's Beatrix's story, but I feel like Volume 1 is almost equally as much a Ren's story, because so much of the film is dedicated to her. Really, half the film starts with her backstory in the animation segment, and then goes all the way through her confrontation with Beatrix. So I think there's a reason why we've sort of come to feel for her and root for her as much as we're ready to see her get, vengeance
sliced,
sort of reaped upon her. But it makes her a great character.
Well, and she's actually very similar to Beatrix, wronged by men her whole life, joining this assassin group, right? And then is kind of has to worry about her position within that assassin group. I actually see them as foils, but also complementary to each other. They're very similar to each other as well. And yes, good villains, exactly. Like with Magneto from X-Men, who I think is the best villain in comic books ever, and I will die on that hill. The reason that he's the best villain is because you feel for him. You know why he's doing what he's doing. You have his backstory. So if Tarantino didn't want us to feel anything for Oren, he wouldn't have told us this backstory of how her parents were killed and how she worked to get revenge on them, and then after that had to kind of stand up as this strong. And by the way, they say that she was the top female assassin. Excuse me, she was the top assassin. All right, men and women do the same job of killing people. So feminism and equality, even with assassins. All right, there's no assassinesses, right? It's just all doing the same job, which is killing people.
Yeah, as much. But
we get to respect her just like we respect Beatrix, right?
Yeah, that's sort of, but I do have to say that was one part of like the screenplay where as soon as you said that, I was like, yeah, if this was being written today, that would not have been one of the top female assassins. It just would have been one of the top assassins.
Well, and I, fun fact about me, I have a blog about Chinese rap and hip hop, and they always say, oh, Vava, she's the best female rapper. And I'm all in Chinese and in English, typing very rapidly, being like, no, she's the best rapper. We're not on a different level, than like, oh, because if you keep saying that, then we'll never fully look like we're competing with the men, right? So she's a top assassin, period, full stop.
And I do want to take this time to go ahead and read out her speech when Tanaka speaks up against her. And we're not monetized, so I'm going to go ahead and read the final line too, because you have to. So here we go. She goes, as your leader, I encourage you from time to time, and always in a respectful manner, to question my logic. If you're unconvinced that a particular plan of action I've decided is the wisest, tell me so, but allow me to convince you, and I promise you right here and now, no subject will ever be taboo. Except, of course, the subject that was just under discussion. The price you pay for bringing up either my Chinese or American heritage as a negative is, I collect your fucking head. Just like this fucker here. Now, if any of you sons of bitches got anything else to say, now's the fucking time.
And you notice she says, I'm going to say this in English, right? She switches from Japanese, which as a language is very, very polite. Even when you're cussing in Japanese, right? The grammar of it is very polite, right? Like you can say, arigato, thank you, or arigato gozaimasu. Like you add things at the end of it, which makes it more respectful. And so she's like, I'm just going to say this in English. And then obviously we get that delivery of this speech of, I welcome your suggestions, but if you, talk about this in the negative, specifically the fact that she's not fully Japanese, then like you better expect to die.
Bye, Nessie. Thanks for coming by.
Thanks for dropping by, Ness. But yeah, I love that because Oren, right? She's going, okay. And that's the thing also. It's not just the fact that she's not fully Japanese, but it's also the fact that she's a woman, right? Working in a man's world. The Yakuza is inherently lots and lots of toxic masculinity going on there. So for Oren then to come in and take over this organization that's inherently masculine, she's going to have to prove herself. And what better way than chopping off a dude's head?
I mean, it's just one of the greatest scenes ever.
And not only that, but you also have the one character that's half French and half Japanese, and her Japanese is flawless, whereas Lucy Liu's Japanese is competent, and I think quite good. That woman who's half French, half Japanese, her French and her Japanese are flawless. So you also have a little bit of perhaps linguistic competition going on there.
Yeah, and she's repeating what she's saying in Japanese, and there's an element of comedy when she's translating like the profanity stuff. It just adds like this extra layer of hilarity. Okay, so we're gonna have to move on to volume 2 in a second, but I would be remiss if I did not mention the character of Hattori Hanzo, played by the great Sonny Chiba, who comes into play at a very instrumental point in this film where Beatrix is, she needs a weapon to basically go to war against Bill. And there's just this great scene where she comes in pretending to be this naive
American
tourist.
Yeah.
And there's just this comedic banter back and forth where he's telling her, you should learn Japanese, very easy.
Yeah.
And I love her reaction. No kidding. I heard it was kind of hard.
Yeah, it's Asian languages when you're coming from the West. Yes, they are hard to learn. Korean is a little bit easier because it doesn't use characters. But yes, it's hard. Yeah, and you also have, which is I just love when I go to Asian restaurants and you have the boss yelling at people back in the kitchen, and this is like the perfect scene where he's like, "Come bring the sake." And he goes, "Why do I always have to bring the sake?" Just like so funny. And then the second she mentions, "I'm looking for someone," he goes, "Oh, who are you looking for?" "Oh, this guy, and I haven't met him yet." Right? And then, "Oh, who is he?" And then she says, "Hanzo." I'm sorry, I forgot the first name. Hattori Hanzo.
And then you hear the guy in the back drop whatever he's holding.
Yes.
And then the whole scene shifts.
And then it's very serious.
And I mentioned the way those shots of their faces are framed is so beautiful. Just the way he's kind of looking up and his head's kind of tilted. It's something very simple, but Tarantino is so brilliant with the way that he films these movies and the way he switches over to speaking in Japanese, because he knows immediately that, okay,
she knows what's up.
She knows. And then there's the moment where they go to where all the swords are, and again a great
impactful.
The music and the reverence with which she treats the swords, and
this is an art form to create these swords, right? And she obviously, and the music as she's kind of walking by looking at them gives you this sense of what, like you said, J-Dub's reverence, right? And the way that she holds it very delicately, right? Like she's holding an ancient, like an old Ming vase, right? She really respects the art of the samurai, and obviously Hanzo has retired, but he too respects that art that he's practiced his whole life.
And probably the thing that stuck with me the most about this film was a piece of music that's used both here as he decides to make the sword, and then again at the end of the film when we get the reveal that Beatrix's daughter is still alive, and that piece of music is called "The Lonely Shepherd." And it's just so, I feel like it's sort of the heart and soul of this first film. And it just adds this feeling of, I don't know how you would put it, during this whole scene with the sword. It's just like you're in awe.
It's a magical moment. And also what my favorite part was in between these two scenes, which is at first he says, "No, I'm not going to make you a sword. I've retired." And she says, "You're going to want to make a sword because I'm going after one of your apprentices, right? So you have some responsibility." And then he writes on the window, "BILL." And that was that's probably my favorite scene, like quiet scene in the whole movie, when he realizes that she is on a righteous mission. And even though he's retired, she deserves this sword, because even though it's going to kill a lot of people in the end, it's going to kill an apprentice who has disgraced the art of the samurai. in the
And
way of the samurai, which is not just about slinging a sword around. It's also a code of conduct, and he has very much disgraced that.
And I do want to talk about that for a moment because, and I'm glad you said that, because we can draw the conclusion that that's kind of the source of animosity between master and apprentice, but it's not explicitly stated either. We, when in volume 2, when Bill references, I can't believe you got him to make you a sword, and she says, all I had to do was drop your name, and he says, that'd do it. we're never explicitly told why he would instantly do that, but it is, of course, heavily implied that Bill, by the nature of what he does and who he is, that he's sort of disgraced and Hanzo and his teachings. But then again, like I said, it's never said outright. So we don't know if that's the primary source, if something else happened as well. And I kind of like that because it's one of those things that's left up to the audience to completely decide. And because I feel like volume 1 is so much about building up this myth, this epic myth of a story, that I like it when things aren't completely spelled out. You have room to kind of, imagine and think about stuff. And now if volume 1 is building the myth of all these things, like, Hattori Hanzo, Bill, the bride, then volume 2 is getting down on a human level and understanding who these people really are. And that's what I love about these two movies, because I do think that they're very different, and why I'm glad that ultimately they were split into 2 separate films, because I think they have different flavors.
Yeah, and also I would argue, J-Dubs, when we get to the Paimei part, which is obviously one big flashback, actually I would argue that the mythology of Bill is torn down a little bit, because he is kind of a walking Orientalist trope. He's this white guy who's learning all of these ancient Eastern arts and just utterly misunderstanding what they're for and the honor that comes with them and the responsibility that is placed on your shoulders when you learn these kinds of things. And he's playing this flute, like he's also kind of dipping into, I mean, I'm wearing a poncho, so I'm not one to speak, but he's kind of dipping into a little bit of anti-indigeneity, right? And so he's sitting there, and this is my favorite scene, I think, other than obviously when she's with Paimei and that training montage. I mean, I love that. Every martial arts movie needs a good training montage. Anyway, when she's talking to him and she's learning about Paimei, and he talks about the White Lotus, he explains the White Lotus completely incorrectly. And he tells this story that about Paimei, which is probably not totally true, but the White Lotus, just really, really quick Chinese history here. They were a rebellious group that were Buddhist at heart. They were rebelling against the last dynasty of China, the Qing, Qing, or Ching, if you want to use the Wade Giles. So they were a rebellion group, but they weren't necessarily this like secret. They were secret in that they were rebelling against the government, so they had to be secret, but they didn't know these like special martial arts moves or anything. And so it's also a complete misunderstanding of Chinese culture and the importance of wushu martial arts. And kung fu itself is gong fu, which literally means to practice something until perfection. So you could have gong fu, you could have kung fu at tea making, or kung fu at cinema, being a cinephile, right? It means you've practiced something to perfection. But most people in the West just think kung fu is about fighting. But it's also about the way of mind, the practice, the reverence for nature and for the goodness of humanity. And that's something that Bill misses, but I think that Beatrix starts to kind of glean onto. And that's why I'm plug for my upcoming His Dark Materials essay is about Orientalism in that series. And I see a lot of Orientalism in this movie, but it's not because Tarantino doesn't know what he's doing. He's actually showing how this kind of trope of white man goes to Asia, learns the secrets, and then comes back and teaches it to other white people, you know, that this is actually a really harmful thing to do, right? Because you don't really understand where this culture is coming from, which is why I've been learning Mandarin since I was 16. I want to understand this as much as I can, but I also recognize my own positionality as a white woman and that I will never fully grasp everything, but I can do my best to be respectful. And Bill hasn't even gone anywhere close to thinking about being respectful.
Sorry.
Stove is back. Hey, Stove.
We're not really here.
But anyways, I didn't mean to go off about Orientalism, but I'm saying that Tarantino is playing with these tropes. Yeah. And that scene with him, and she's like, oh God, girls in the chat and watching later, I know you can relate to this, where you're like, oh, he knows so much. He's so great. He's so handsome. He's there playing his flute. And then years later, you find out he was full of bullshit. Like, that's exactly what Bill represents, is this guy he's wooing her with his knowledge of the Orient. Right?
What's hilarious is that he does the exact same thing with comic book lore.
Yeah.
Like, he's obsessed with Superman, and that comes out at the end of the film, but he completely misreads what Superman is all about. He talks about how much he loves the mythology, but then he says that that the Clark Kent persona is Superman's critique on the whole human race, as though Superman despised the human race.
Yeah,
it just shows a complete lack of thinking on his part. And
and the confidence that mediocre white men speak with is just appalling, because they're wrong, but they say it so confidently you want to believe them. And that's how I see Bill overall. But when I first saw this movie, all this totally went over my head. Other than anime, I didn't really have that much experience with this, but and also feminist analysis was a later development for me. But yeah, this is, yes, the comic book. Yeah, there are many times where Bill shows his ass. And if you know about Superman, you can do it. If you're like me and you know a little bit more about China and Japan than obviously Bill does, then you can catch these little things. And that's, I think, the details that Tarantino really has in there is really awe-inspiring, right? That I can watch this again after so many years and still enjoy it, but get completely different things out of it. And I think that his movies, just like George R. R. Martin's books are meant to be reread, his movies are meant to be rewatched.
And it's funny because bringing up again his whole speech about Superman, when I saw this originally, my point of view on that was more like, oh, it's cool and quirky that Bill is, referencing Superman, and that Tarantino's writing all this dialogue, around comic books. I thought that's fun and that's quirky, and I love it, but it didn't really sort of sink in until much later that it's fun to hear that stuff, but Bill's wrong about what he's saying, and the fact that I didn't know that about the White Lotus, and you brought that to light for me, it reinforces that whole thing where Bill's a guy who likes to talk out of his ass, pretty much.
Girls in the chat all know that at least one of those guys and I in my undergrad, master's, and now in my PhD come across many educated men that are like that. They read like half an article on Buddhism, and then want to talk to me about the sutras. And I think it's also, and with Orientalism also comes the idea that in the West is dominant because it is better, and so therefore we can have our Western ideas and then co-opt some Eastern ideas, but in the end, our native culture is better, and we just use what is useful from the East. And it's so Bill, he just surface level understands things, but then talks about them as if he understands them very deeply. I'm so deep, I'm not like other men.
And yet, as much as he frustratingly does not know what he's talking about with a lot of things. That nonetheless, he's a very compelling character. And the crux of this film really is the love story between him and Beatrix. The film starts off with actually showing us Bill after an entire volume 1 where we don't see his face. He's just sort of this, again, like a mythical figure. And
Yes.
then the instant volume 2 starts up, we hear him playing his flute. She walks out there, and then we see the man. And he's all of a sudden sort of this flesh and blood human. This sequence is great because, especially, again, talking about, it's no surprise to anybody that I'll keep bringing up the music. But, when he's acting like he's just going to let the wedding go on, or in this case, the wedding rehearsal. And then there's that moment where, she's putting on her veil, and that dramatic music creeps in, that boom, and she's like, do I look pretty? And he says, oh yes. And then she walks away, and it's just him standing there, and the camera pulls out to what we saw the product of at the beginning of volume 1. This is going to now be what happened to Beatrix. And also, I just wanted to, if you could, J-Dubs, put up Guilty Undertaker's comment about the 5-point exploding heart technique. I think that's really what Tarantino was also trying to do, which is build Bill up as this kind of shit talker, so that when you hear about this special technique, you're like, okay, this is just more of him talking crap, right? So then for her, and that's the thing, is that she was the apprentice to Paime that Bill never could be, into Onzo. Hanzo, yeah. So she's the protege that Bill thought he was, is also a lot of what's going on here. She doesn't talk big like he does. She does the work, right? Whereas he talks big and takes what he can, but doesn't do the work. Yeah, and another thing is, as far as the 5-point palm exploding heart technique, it's just ridiculous when you say it out loud.
It sounds cooler in Chinese, I'm sure.
But as much as, yes, Bill is a shit talker and all that stuff, but these movies are also paying homage to all these old martial arts films, and there's always a secret move.
Yes.
In those old martial arts films. So, like
in Hero, what we talked about, the secret that he could kill anyone within 10 paces with this secret technique, right? It's and this isn't even an Orientalist trope. I've watched a lot of wushu movies. I'm sure you have too, J-Dubs. There is always a secret technique that the apprentice needs to learn in order to beat the bad guy. Yeah,
so of course that's real, because this is still a Tarantino movie, that's a love letter to all those old movies. And we should talk about some of the other great characters in this volume. We have both Bud and hold on, sorry, I'm just
the one-eye lady. I'm sorry, I don't remember names.
L Driver, and played by the great Daryl Hannah, and Bud is played by Michael Madsen. And I actually think this may be my favorite role of his, because he's just so pitiful.
Well, and he's Bill's brother, correct?
Yeah.
So he's kind of living in his brother's shadow. He's like living in this really crappy motor home. Yeah, it's a little pathetic.
And there's this indication that he's not a good person, but maybe he feels a bit of remorse about the life that he led, because he could certainly still be doing the assassin thing if he wanted to. But he's chosen not to.
He almost defeats Beatrix too by attempting to bury her alive. So it's also a little weird that he seems pathetic, but then he almost defeats her.
Yeah. So I think he's sort of caught in this middle ground of maybe having some regrets about the things he's done, but also he still has this, it's sort of like a love-hate relationship with his brother, who he still cares for, and I think that drives him to exact some kind of revenge against, or not revenge, but just the violence against Beatrix, in spite of maybe almost feeling guilty about what he's done to her in the past. It's a very strange sort of dynamic that goes on between, I think, all these characters, between him and Bill, him and Beatrix, and him and Elle, who he makes a fatal mistake of having her be the one that he calls after this, because he just wants some money. But like, if I were him, I would have, like, not, he goes ahead and, tranquilizes Beatrix. What he should have done is let her be there, call up Elle and say, okay, you can come have a one-on-one fight with her like you probably want to, and I'll stay out of it.
Yeah. He
might have been okay if he had done that, but he makes the mistake of at least thinking that he's dealt with Beatrix himself, thereby enraging Elle, and that was not a good decision to make.
Yeah, and it's, I would say reading between the lines, but I think it's quite obvious from the volume 1 where she's on the phone with Bill and she gets called off that Elle is in love with Bill. So a lot of her hatred for Beatrix, once again, girls, you know what I'm talking about, right? When a man comes between you go a little crazy. So there's also this, her violence is not just because Beatrix is in the way, it's because specifically she's in the way of Elle being with Bill. At least that's how Elle sees it.
And is Daryl Hannah not just an absolute badass?
Oh, just a delight. And I mean that in the worst way possible. And the way that she, every time she smiles, it's the most, I don't know how to say it. It's the most like evil smile, to where it's like, okay, can she smile normally, or is it always this I can't wait to bite off your head smile?
And I mean, the whole thing with the snake in the money bag, and then when she just sits there giving this speech to Buddy, and she's like,
and she wrote it down word
last
for word.
Few agonizing minutes you have left.
I've never seen a villain literally write down their monologue. That was it was hilarious, because it's a play on this villain monologuing trope where she literally is like flipping the pages for monologue.
Now you should pay attention.
That?
Now you should pay attention, because this concerns you.
And I'm glad that they also basically just picked another blonde girl to be kind of Beatrix's arch nemesis in this case, other than just Bill. Because it also shows she wants to replace Beatrix, right? As the protege and as the lover of Bill. And also something I did want to mention too, it's very obvious that Bill is older than Beatrix. So we also have this idea of he's older and therefore wiser kind of going on whenever Beatrix was first becoming enamored with him. And I think that Elle also falls for that kind of assumption that older men are therefore smarter, and age doesn't have anything to do with smarts with some people. So. Well,
yeah. And you can hear that in the deference she gives him when they're on the phone in volume 1.
Yes.
And again, especially in volume 1, the dialogue feels like sort of master and apprentice dialogue.
Yeah. And he's once again perverting a very special relationship in Chinese martial arts and in the way of the samurai, which is the master and the protege, the student. That's not one that should ever turn sexual, because it's an inherently unequal relationship, being a teacher with a student, and therefore it's taking advantage of your position, because you can't, when you're in an inferior position like that, you can't fully give consent, even if you think you are. Me Too movement moments happening all over the place in this movie.
And then of course we get the big showdown between Beatrix and Elle, where it's like so funny because it feels so epic and huge, but it's in this beat down trailer.
Oh my god.
And she's giving this big speech, and I killed your master, and now I'm going to kill you too, with your own sword no less, which in the very immediate future will become my sword. And it's so over the top, but it's so great. And then I want to apologize in advance for saying it, because it feels like such an anti-feminist thing to say, but her follow-up line, she's like, bitch, you don't have a future.
Well, we have the first scene, the very first fight scene in Volume 1, and she says bitch every other line too, right? It's a word that's also used by women to degrade other women. So it's very much these women are the get it ready, are an extension of the patriarchy by being following Bill and doing his bidding. They're not really actively questioning if all of those women decide to work together and kill Bill, this would have been over within 15 minutes, right?
Well, just seriously, because the only other guy is Bud, and he's, again, sort of gone into this pitiful existence where, he's taking crap from his employer at the club, who's just like hammering. It's like, that's one of the funniest scenes, because just like this guy's seen, in other moments of the previous one that we've seen, is like this, one of these badass assassins, and he's just taking all this shit from this employer who you'd figure, why doesn't he just, beat the crap out of him? But yeah, I just love all that stuff where, he's like cutting, taking away his work hours. He's like, let's go to the calendar time for Buddy. It's a lot of fun, but point is, it shows that the women in this movie are no surprise, the best characters, and they're, I hate always saying strong women, that's such a, it's repetitive, because, as I'd like to say women are just inherently strong, but they are the strongest characters of this story. And you're so right. If they had banded together, Bill would not stand a chance, at all.
Yeah, and I also think when we get to, oh my God, I'm the gore queen. Those in the chat who know me know that. I have a really high tolerance for gore, but I can't with eye stuff. I can't. And so when she takes out her other eye and then steps on it, I was like, ah! Like, I was holding popcorn and I was like shaking the popcorn. I was like, I can't with the eye stuff. I can't. So that's the one part of this whole movie, and in any Tarantino movie, that I look away. So Game of Thrones fans, you know what I'm talking about when the Mountain and the Red Viper fight, the Red Viper of Dorne fight. I have to look away for that scene every time. I can't with the eye stuff. I can't.
See, but this is the thing. I could actually watch the Red Viper moment. When she steps on that eye and it squishes, I'm like, no.
It's also the sound.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. Yeah, so that to end that battle with that, and the whole time she has one eye, and it's kind of like Chekhov's gun. Like, if you have someone with one eye, it's gonna be, and ultimately it's gonna be used that then their other eye is gonna be taken. So it was coming full circle, but also that's the one part of these movies that I have to look away. I can't with eye stuff. I don't know what it is. I can do the part where she slices the back of that guy's foot. Like, I can do all that with the cutting off the arms and spray. Like, that's fine. But the eyes, no. I can't even put on eye makeup. I can't.
Let's just touch. I hate just rushing through all this stuff, but we have to. Let's talk briefly about the final sequence of the film where she discovers that her daughter is still alive, and you really sort of brought home this point when we were watching it. It's really disgusting. Bill, just through this entire sequence, is using the daughter to manipulate Beatrix, and because he should have been dead instantly, and there's this whole just drawn out scene where they're playing mommy and daddy, and it's kind of sickening to watch him drag that out.
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of like mommy for a moment, basically. She gets to, it's kind of a little bit of what could have been if Bill wasn't a terrible person, right? It's kind of like they could have had a life like this together. Yeah, I did. I left the popcorn alone for a couple more scenes after that. But yeah, she gets to feel what motherhood might have been like, but he ruined that for her. She thought that he had taken away any possibility of her being a mother, but now she realizes he took away the actual reality that she was a mother from her, and that she could not forgive. I mean, obviously, she thought that that the baby was dead and that she was put in a coma for 4 years. But now it becomes less about her own, losing 4 years of her life or losing her baby. He literally raised her daughter without her. And that is, I think, the ultimate sin of Bill. Beyond, being Orientalist and just being a general asshole, I think by holding her daughter and then using her against her whenever he knows that she's come to kill him, it's like the final nail in the coffin as far as any hope for Bill, for her letting him off the hook, basically.
Yeah. And I do want to say we're not going to talk about it because we have to wrap up Kill Bill pretty quickly here. But I do want to mention an earlier scene that comes after the whole Pai Mei flashback where she basically punches her way out of the coffin. And again, the music, some more in the Morricone score. It's just one of the most sort of brilliant scenes in the film. It feels emotional. It feels, again, fist pumping, it's a great moment. Anyway, so I just wanted to interject that real quick because we do actually have to wrap up. There's, this whole final scene between Beatrix and Bill. You said something where the first time you watched it, you were just sort of waiting for the fight to happen. But what is so great is this scene draws out, and it's so much about the relationship and sort of working through all this stuff that happened and coming to terms with it. And I like that the fight, kind of, it explodes and it's kind of over in a second. And then we get that. It would be very easy especially for us in the audience, to just say, okay, screw you, Bill, for all the stuff you did. But it is kind of an emotional farewell between the two characters.
Yeah, and when I first saw that, I really didn't appreciate that scene. And I'm glad I watched it again and really thought about it and realized that they had a lot to work through. But I think in the end, it was just about sitting down and kind of talking out what they could talk out and realizing that his time had come and that he did this technique that she did use this technique that I think it's hinted at that Bill was never able to master it, correct? Or maybe he did know how to use it. I'm not sure.
It's never quite said. I think he's just surprised that. Oh wait, no, you're right. He does say earlier in the film, it's kind of one of his best lines where she says, "Did he teach you that?" And he goes, "He teaches nobody the 5-point palm exploding heart technique."
Okay.
And so but he did teach her.
It also comes full circle to what I was saying earlier, which is that she's the protege that he thought he was. And so I think that in the end was, rather than this big, like he said, we could go fight on the beach, right? I go, oh, okay. And then no, they're just sitting there outside, but there's this idea of she's done this big boss fight with 4 or 5 people at this point, that this is not really what it's about. It's about showing him that she really learned from the Eastern Masters what he could not.
And there is sort of a Captain Marvel moment of kind of being like, I don't have anything to prove to you, so there doesn't need to be a big showdown. And
after all of that, she realizes that she doesn't need to prove doesn't have anything to prove, and it's best to just get it over with.
Yeah, and we had that big epic showdown with Oren in Volume 1, so you're not going to get any bigger than that in terms of a fight. So that's why it really works that this is an emotional resolution rather than an action sequence. And yeah, and I just love again that music as he, you know, you see his hand grab the side of the chair and then he stands up to take his 5 steps, and it's just like, you know, you can say all the things you want about his character and, you know, as a person, and like how full of shit he is, but he is a really, you know, a character, as a character within the film, he's a really great one. And to just see him kind of walk off and meet his death in that kind of epic fashion is really cool to see.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and finish up with Kill Bill. Do you have any final thoughts before?
I think mostly what I want to say is that it's, if you really appreciate this kind of as a work of an American form of Japanese cinema, then I think it really enriches your understanding of it. And the kind of things that I was talking about earlier, where picturing his minions and himself kind of as being this kind of patriarchal figure that is stopping her from reclaiming her autonomy, also enriches our understanding of this movie. And we can still enjoy the craziness of the movie, right? Especially when she fights all those minions, and you can really appreciate that. But Tarantino always hides these really big, important themes under some fun martial arts, action scenes.
Yeah. And once again, this was Volume 1 was the first Tarantino movie I ever saw, and I saw a lot of his films in between that and Volume 2, and I don't think I even mentioned this. When I initially saw Volume 2, I was not super impressed because I think it's very different from Volume 1, and I think I wanted more of the same. But once I saw it on DVD, it became pretty much my favorite Tarantino film. Even if I might not think it's his best, but it's certainly my favorite. Okay, so I want to do the mid-roll right now since we're an hour in, even though we're not halfway done. But we'll go ahead and do the mid-roll.
Well, we're doing 5 movies, so we're like, we only got 3 left. It's it's 35% done. I don't know.
Yeah. So next week coming up, we have The Nightmare Before Christmas that we're going to be talking about. And we got 2 very special guests. We have my Here Be Dragons co-host, Steven Stark, and we have Lady Triple coming to talk with us. So that's going to be a whole lot of fun. There will be singing to be had, I'm sure. And yeah, it's just going to be a bunch of fun. What do you have coming up on your channel, Amy?
I'm so glad you asked. I just recorded a video with Dan over at Voice of Geekdom. So definitely check out his channel. He does all Tolkien stuff, but we just did a video about his Dark Materials. So he's branching out a little bit, and we're getting hyped up for season 2 coming out on HBO. So we were looking at the trailer and talking about what to expect for season 2. Both of us has read the book, so we tried to keep it as spoiler-free as possible. We basically only gave you what the trailer gave you, but we also got a little bit more in depth as to what those things are going to mean going forward and how important they are. So I really had a good time. So that should be up on his channel soon. And as far as what I've got coming up, I'm going to record next week a discussion about Dark Star from A Song of Ice and Fire with my co-author from my essay about Dark Star. So check out my essay on my channel. I read all my essays out to you. And lately, I've been then having a panel to discuss them. So this is one that I had the essay. It's already been out, but I didn't have a discussion. So I'm bringing her back, and we're going to talk about it together. Her theory about Dark Star and how she thinks that he's working for Duran Martel. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then I have Lo the Lynx, who has an amazing WordPress called Queer Musings. They are going to be on my channel. And we are going to talk about my essay, Orientalism and His Dark Materials, and their essay, Colonialism and His Dark Materials. Orientalism and colonialism are very, very closely related. So we're excited about that. And I'm also going to have Rohan at Cyril Woodcocks on Twitter to talk about Cersei and her parallels to the last Empress of China. And Then after that, I'm having Lo back on because we're going to talk about our essay that we're writing together about Lyson Omar. And that is going to end it for 2020 for the Amy Blackfire YouTube channel. But if you check out my Twitter, I have my upcoming essay hypes for 2021. More His Dark Materials, more Song of Ice and Fire. And I'm going to start writing about The Poppy War, which is a Chinese-American fantasy series that I highly recommend. R.F. Kuang is the author, and she just won 100 Best Fantasy Books of All Time by the New York Times. So, yes, and I've been reading The Poppy War to some people in the Here Be Dragons fam on the Slack. So over Zoom, I've been reading them chapter by chapter, and we've been discussing. And so I mostly did that so that they'd be able to understand my essays, but I also did it because I think this is one of the best works of fantasy I've ever read. And because it's Chinese American, I really want to promote specifically female and also Asian American authors because they are doing some amazing work. But yeah, I have a lot coming up. And if you follow me on Twitter, I am also Amy Poehler, Poller. And I love to poll you about all things Song of Ice and Fire and His Dark Materials. And I love getting your feedback. So lots of polls. I try and keep it like 2 polls a month, but sometimes I go a little overboard, but it's very fun. And yeah, I really love all of you guys. Thank you for tuning into my stuff. And I look forward to hopefully being on other people's channels as well coming up.
So in other words, you don't have much going on.
No, and on top of this, I also am working on my PhD in teaching. So and co-hosting this channel. So if you needed a co-host, I'm wide open as far as work in the fandom. So
wow. I do also want to mention that coming up this month, I'll be doing an interview with author Doug Adams, who wrote the music of the Lord of the Rings films. That'll be on November 21st. And then next month, both Amy and I, along with special guests, will be talking about all 3 of the Lord of the Rings films. So stay tuned for that. Okay.
And we have an upcoming Colette stream as well, right?
Yes. And that'll be the week following the Doug Adams interview. So we'll be returning with the Knights of Kira, which will also be with our fellow knight Jared, who I was able to save up enough money to afford
that actor. Jared.
Okay,
Return of the Knights of Kira. I'm so excited. All right,
we got enough to get through, so let's jump back in. Next, we're talking about the follow-up to Kill Bill, Inglourious Basterds, which is a freaking awesome movie, and I actually think it might be his best film.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. Especially after watching all of these again, kind of back to back this last week, it really stuck out to me as he does all of his usual things with the rolling cameras and with the really obviously amazing casting, all of the great dialogue, the tension, and also obviously the theme of revenge, which I think continues throughout all of his movies, right? In this case, we have Shoshana getting revenge for her family and for her people, the Jewish people against the Nazis. And so because of that, it brings all of what Tarantino is good at together, but it's done in such a way that is absolute perfection. I have no notes for this film as far as how it could have been made better. I mean, and also, I know you appreciated this, J-Dubs, a huge shout out to cinema, right? She owns a cinema house. The use of cinema as propaganda was a huge theme in this movie, and was huge during the Nazi era, during the Maoist era, during the World War II era in America, where we, had our own propaganda films. So it also has a lot going on.
Yeah, this is like, my dad tends to think that Tarantino is just kind of weird in general.
He is weird, but that's not a bad thing.
He is. But when he saw this movie, he really liked it a lot. I think that this was kind of a breakthrough for a lot of people who maybe didn't care for Tarantino, but this is just such a great film. And what you were saying about cinema, I love that at the end of the day, this movie kind of says that, yeah, that's right, cinema can save the world.
Yeah,
Which is
it
probably why I love
can.
it so much.
I think the question of why does Tarantino do what he does, and if I show people this movie, Inglourious Basterds, they don't even have to ask why. They know why. You know what Tarantino is trying to do with cinema, because he literally has a character, Shoshana, doing that with cinema. And of course, shout out, of course, to her lover, who is a person of color. So you have a Jewish woman and a man of color. Obviously, they are the prime targets of anti-Nazism. And I also, obviously, as a queer woman, have to point out that many gay people and queer people were also killed, and people who were disabled as well. So we have these very targeted groups of people. Basically, anyone who you basically had to be heterosexual and specifically Christian and white. And that's just not, I mean, in the end, there are a lot of many other people in the world, right? So there were more people that fell on the target side than on the, the Nazi side of being protected.
Yeah. I definitely have to say that the character of Shoshana, I mean, obviously she's the real focal point of this movie. And what's sort of shocking but not terribly surprising to me is that you would have never gotten that impression watching the advertisements for this movie, because it was all about Brad Pitt
and the Bastards
and the Bastards. And,
yeah.
And I was trying to think back at the time why the previews for the movie didn't look super compelling, but that's because there is no real like emotional character arc for the Bastards. So the previews all felt kind of hollow. Whereas the emotion of the story comes from Shoshana.
Absolutely.
And it's just, and she's the reason why I love this so much. I'll put up this picture again. I love when it gets towards the end of the film and the David Bowie song from the film Cat People comes up, and you would think that would be totally out of place, but man, it just works. And
he's good at using, modern music or contemporary music for, pre-modern times, period pieces. And I think also like with Django when he uses hip hop in it. Now, I just want to say something that I find interesting. Well, I find a lot interesting about this movie, but the theme of disguise is huge in this movie, right? Will she get found out? Right? Will the Bastards, when they're pretending to be terribly pretending to be Italian film, crew, will they be found out? And there's the German actress, right? When they're in the pub and he goes, that iconic scene will have 3, and then you see that guy's face change, right? The disguise and keeping up disguises, right? Not being able to keep up disguises and how they play into their disguises is a huge theme of this movie. And a lot of disguise is about deceit, but it's also about acting. So these are actors that are acting like it's kind of meta. It's a little bit of actingception going on here, right? So I think disguise is a very interesting part of this, and kind of deceit for the right reasons, right? Whenever the very first scene we get, that Frenchman is deceiving the Nazis, right, for the right reasons, because people's lives are at stake, right?
Yes, and as I'm just going to say this as Christoph Waltz, because I just love when he calls him Monsieur Le Petit.
Yeah.
We just have to talk about Christoph Waltz, like just over and over, because. And it's funny because I watched this after we rewatched Django, and it's so startling to see the difference between these characters that he plays. While in Django, he's his character, he's not perfect. He's got some flaws, but he's a good person, and you can't get any more despicable than Hans Landa in Inglourious Basterds, because this is a guy who knows what he's doing is evil.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's just, but he's good at it.
Yeah.
He's good at, as he says, hunting down the Jews, and he sort of delights in that.
And speaking of disguise as well, and being able to hide, I think another reason that the Nazis and that many anti-Semitic people dislike Jewish people is many times they can pass. I hate to use that term, but it's true. They are lighter. Many of them are lighter skinned, and so as long as you don't see them actively praying in Hebrew or have the yarmulke or the Star of David, that they could, if they're careful, pass, especially during this time. And so they were so obsessed with hidden Jews, right? Jews that were trying to pass or that were hiding. And so there's also this, obviously you have the projectionist at the cinema who is black. It's really hard to hide that. But then you have Shoshana, who's just a normal French woman, right? She can pass. And that is the Nazis' worst fear, is the Jew that got away, that pretends to be just a normal European. And once again, normal. I'm not using this is how the Nazis would see it. Obviously, the French Jews, the German Jews, the Polish Jews were Polish, French, and Jewish, and German, right? But they also happen to be Jewish, right? But the Nazis could not accept these identities, right? You were Jewish no matter where you came from, no matter how integrated you were into the society, no matter how many generations of your family were German or whichever country you want to pick.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just went off on a rant about anti-Semitism, but
no,
it should be ranted against, especially right now. So
yeah, and this again felt like
this watched real differently than 2009. I think I did see it the year that it came out.
All of these, a lot of these movies did. I especially this and Django Unchained, because we actually watched Django Unchained together.
We did.
I think on Tuesday, election night, and then I followed it up with this, and I just like, obviously it felt very gratifying to see a movie where they basically murder Hitler and take revenge on all the Germans, and it just felt very cathartic on that night, when obviously we still didn't know which way things were going to go. But yeah, it's just as much as these movies always kind of felt relevant, I think it took on a whole new layer.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, and I think always, like with Django and like with Beatrix from Kill Bill, their revenge is bloody and destructive, but it's justified. And I think Tarantino is really working with this idea of there's, it's a very common trope of revenge ruins a person. You work so hard to go for revenge that then you lose yourself. But I think these movies are kind of showing that, if revenge is what you need, it's what you need. It doesn't matter what people tell you about, oh, it'll eat you up alive. You'll never, if you only live for revenge. But for them, for Shoshana, who lost her family, and if she were to be revealed as a Jew, would be sent to a camp, that doesn't matter, that it's quote unquote ruining her life or eating her soul. She needs revenge, and not just for her, but for her brothers and sisters around the world that are being persecuted.
Yeah, and I don't know that she even necessarily thinks that she's going to come out of that night at the cinema alive anyway. So
yeah.
So the fact that she meets her end it would probably be perfectly fine by her, just so long as her revenge is exacted, and it certainly is in glorious fashion. That image of her on the big movie screen,
yes,
laughing maniacally
as it burns.
Oh
my God.
It's beautiful.
And that also, I think, is also doing a lot with the common Nazi portrayal of Jews as godless and therefore of the devil, right? She's laughing with the flames going on. It's using their own paranoia against them. It's so well done. And also, who's the one that lights the flame? It's a black guy. So it's like double like, screw you, Nazis, like, you deserve this, right? And we, as the audience, it's obviously an AU. We know that this is not how Hitler died, but this is a very fitting end, more fitting than him, committing suicide in a bunker, which just felt cowardly, and it doesn't feel right. This, being burned down by an African American, or I guess he's not African American because he's a Frenchman, a black Frenchman, and a Jewish woman. That feels like the end that Hitler should have met. And I think that's a lot of what this movie is satisfying, is this alternate universe revenge fantasy going on.
I do want to jump back to, because you mentioned the Basterds and when they're posing as Italians. I just want to take a minute to laugh at Brad Pitt's
Grazie.
Arrivederci.
Arrivederci. Italian. And I forget, was he supposed to be from his character from Tennessee? What I forget which.
I'm not
maybe Kentucky. I don't remember, one of those. Yeah. And Brad Pitt was actually born in my home state of Oklahoma. He didn't grow up there, but he was born in Oklahoma. So I hope that he it was kind of playing off of some of his the people in his life with a Southern accent.
I mean, it just nails it here. He really is putting in the absolute minimum effort, and especially
right?
when he and then he's telling Bridget von Hammersmark, yeah, I speak the most Italian. It's like he's the worst at it.
And Bridget, she puts so much work into her disguise. Shoshana puts so much work in her disguise. So this is once again going back to this idea of, disguise and being careful not to be found out, and how much they put into it. And, we have that scene that's probably one of the most jarring scenes for me, which is where Shoshana is talking to Londa, the guy who killed her family. And he's like, and I think she'll have a glass of milk. And you're like, oh my God, does he know? So there's these parts where you're like, oh, did they get found out? Oh no, they're not found out. So then when you get to the Brad Pitt part where they're pretending to buongiorno, right? When they're pretending to be Italian, then you're like, oh, okay, well, if Shoshana made it, maybe they can just muddle through, right? But then that character that's talking to them, is it Londa? I don't remember, who starts speaking Italian really well. Just kind of shows you how little thought they put into this.
I mean, again, I just have to keep talking about Christoph Waltz, because then when he asks Bridget, how she injured her leg, and she says, rock climbing.
I was dumb. I tried rock climbing or mountain climbing.
And he just starts doing this over the top, like, attention drawing laugh that he just burst out with. And it's like, yeah, you're not going to get one over on this guy. He already, he knows what's up. Yeah. So,
and I also found that interesting, the scene where he lets her know, Bridget, that he's found her out with the shoe. It kind of, for me, reminded me of Cinderella in a weird way, where instead of oh, you're my princess, it's, oh, you're the woman that I'm gonna kill now, right? It's kind of a perversion of a modern, of a common fairy tale.
And that scene obviously infers a lot about their probable prior relationship, because he's completely different in that moment than at any other point in the film, where we see this character as sort of calm and cold-blooded and sort of methodical, and then he just unleashes in rage in that moment. And,
oh my God, and when he's strangling her, and it, there's so much violence in this movie with shooting and with burning and all of that, but I think that intimate act of strangulation is the most violent in all of this movie.
And again, it goes back to what we were saying, is that there's two kinds of violence in Tarantino movies, and that's the very sort of real, disturbing violence that you're meant to really feel. Contrasted with what comes soon after, with all the over-the-top shooting of all the Nazis.
Yes, and that's the thing is when they're getting their revenge, like with Kill Bill, like with Django Unchained, which we're about to talk about, that's when it's, get him. But then when the heroes, right, particularly women, when there's violence against women happening, and in Django, people of color, it's just raw and brutal and lasts a long time, right? Kind of, and it's really drawn out. Whereas the Nazis, like, oh, shoot one, over here, shoot one. But the strangulation is like, and the way that Tarantino uses the camera and you see her legs kind of moving, it's excruciating. Aaron, my love. But it's like you were saying, those two types of violence, you see that in every movie, and it's very impactful because it changes the way you feel about violence scene by scene. Basically, you don't feel the same way about violence with each scene. You kind of change one way or the other with how justified it is, if you have a visceral reaction to it, if you're rooting for it. Pretty much every scene is different.
Okay, so I want to make sure to fit in a couple things real quick, because I have to mention that, on the subject of like actors who weren't that big a deal at the time and then later became super famous, Michael Fassbender is in this movie, and I love him in this because he's playing like super British. And one of my favorite parts of maybe not one of my favorite parts, but a really fun part is where he goes in, he's recruited for this mission, and there's just this scene between him and frickin' Mike Myers.
Like, what is he doing there with that mustache? What is happening?
And it's like Mike Myers is doing like the most cliche, like upper British, sort of military commander possible, where he's like, down with Hitler, it's so much fun. And then Michael Fassbender is like, all the way down, sir. So that's a lot of fun. And then I do enjoy just that long drawn out scene at the underground bar, basically, where it's like this, are they going to get out of this situation? And again, it's just this long drawn out conversation where you're like, the guy's on to them. It's just, is he gonna trap them in some way? And it is the three,
rather than the three.
And then it just explodes in this quick violence. And that's what I love about Tarantino. It's just these long drawn out dialogue scenes that ramp up the tension, and then the violence just happens in a matter of seconds, and it's so explosive and
that's terrible to witness. Classic Tarantino buildup. And also, if I could just say a note about fetishization, we have them fetishizing Bridget, right? This famous German actor, and then we have also the fetishizing of the man as a war hero. I'm sorry, I'm totally blanking on his character's name, who killed all those people in the tower. He is fetishized by the Germans, specifically those in the service.
His name was Frederick Zoller.
Frederick, right? So then he, in turn, I think the biggest example of fetishization is he fetishizes Shoshana, who he knows as, I think, Emmanuel. And so what he does is he thinks he's doing her a favor by propping her up with the cinema and all this and that. No, you're going to have all these VIPs. And then he's the nice guy, right? Because he's fetishizing her and wants to get with her. But then the second that he comes in the projector room and she's like, I don't have time for you, that's when the real man comes out. This whole time, he wasn't doing this because he's a nice guy. He was doing this because he wanted to get with her. And when he's rejected, he totally pops off, right? And she shoots him, and then he shoots her, and it's like, oh my God, that's so much killing, right? But this idea of fetishization of he doesn't really know who she is. If he knew who she was, he would have killed her long ago, or tried to, right? And so there's this idea of kind of building up someone because you don't really know who they are, basically based on their disguise, right? So Bridget, they fetishize her because of her disguise as a good German actor, right? And then Shoshana, who was Emmanuel at that point, is built up because of her disguise as just a normal French woman. And it's a really huge, I think, also commentary on how women can be put up on a pedestal, and then the second that they don't live up to that, their violence is done against them, basically.
Yeah, and I also
which I'm going to basically drink because that was all patriarchal stuff.
And I think it's a nice sort of debunking of this idea, because we almost want to see Frederick as, oh, he's the nice Nazi.
Yeah.
And then it's like, no, you're just an asshole.
Yeah, exactly. And there's this classic trope of, if you're just nice to her, she'll sleep with you, right? Like women are vending machines and you put in nice coins and sex comes out. Really not how it works, guys.
Yeah.
So I really think that, like Jess says in the comments, this obsessive and possessive nature that men will have crushes on women, and I don't even want to use the word crush because it is an obsession to the point of destructiveness.
Well, because she makes it clear that she doesn't want anything to do with him. She
never let him on, and she's in love with her projectionist, right?
Yeah.
But he would not recognize that as love because her projectionist is a black man. So there's also some racial components obviously going on there. He thinks that she's single, even though we know better. She's very much in love with her projectionist, and they have, I think, a really tender and loving relationship. And it's probably the only healthy-ish relationship we see in this whole movie.
And of course, nobody in that, horrible society even considers for a moment that they're lovers. It's like, no, why would you? Oh.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so aside from that, and just circling back around to Londa, there's just all that stuff towards the end of the film. Like, I just have to mention that's a bingo. Is that how you say it? That's a bingo. You just say bingo. Bingo. How fun. and then the film ends with, that callback to earlier when Brad Pitt, carves the Nazi symbol into his head, and that final music comes in, and that great line, Yudovich, I think this just might be my masterpiece. And I'm like, that's Tarantino talking there.
And also, once again, goes back to this theme that I've been sprinkling into this whole discussion about disguise. They don't want them to take off their SS uniforms and be in disguise as a normal person. And we know now for sure that there are former Nazis in America and in Argentina that were placed there by the government, the American and Argentinian governments respectively, and hidden away under disguise as normal people and not Nazis. And Brad Pitt's having none of that. No. We're going to carve that right there, and good luck hiding now, right? So we have this, just as the Nazis feared these Jews that could pass, we fear Nazis that can pass, right?
Yeah. And actually, there's a really good movie that I haven't seen for years, but it was one of the first films that I saw with Ian McKellen, where I think it's called Apt Pupil, where he plays basically a Nazi who's just in disguise, living as a suburban, any suburban old man, and it's a really frightening image later in the film when he puts on his Nazi uniform. And so I do think, we have that sort of innate fear.
Well, and we also have, if anyone that's seen Watchmen, this idea of KKK members that are passing as non-racist people, right? It happens. It's out there, and it's not paranoia if they're really out to get you. So, but that's the main theme, obviously, in addition to racism, anti-Semitism, revenge, and cinema. So I've been taking notes when we do these focus-ons. I don't want to take 4 notes per movie, which is what I normally do. I've been just doing themes, and my main theme is this idea of disguise, which I think is very important in this movie.
Yeah. So obviously, there's a lot of stuff we didn't touch on because we're having to breeze through this. But and anything final you want to say about Inglourious Bastards?
No, I went down my list, and yeah, that's obviously you and I both agree that this is Tarantino's best work. I think because all of his themes come together, and he does it in such a beautiful, beautiful way. And the just iconic scenes like the bar scene is what a lot of people talk about when she comes up on the screen and there's burning, right? These are things that are kind of seared into your mind. This is probably of all the movies because these were all rewatches for me, but the ones that I remembered the most about was Inglourious Basterds. It really sticks with you.
And I do also want to just say, because we did talk about it, but just to say again, that whole opening sequence is utterly brilliant with Londa, talking to Lepidite, and again the rising tension of that scene. It's because when it erupts in violence at the end, and the music, it's like you have this dark choral music that happens when he's calling the soldiers in to fire on the Jewish people who were hiding underneath the house. And it's just, I think that sort of immediately that scene draws you in for the film.
And the way that he lets Shoshana go with this kind of smugness that he knows that there's no place to run in Nazi Germany. And well, this is Nazi occupied France, right? He knows that if he's not the Nazi that'll get her, then another Nazi will get her. And that just it's heartbreaking to think about.
And there's just that ridiculous pipe too.
Right? The Frenchman has this like normal sized pipe, and then he comes in with this Sherlock Holmes comedic pipe, and Sherlock Holmes like, it's overkill. Come on, Londa. Like, chill. You're extra right now.
Okay, so we mentioned that this movie felt relevant watching it, but Django Unchained, within minutes, I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I said something to you, which was sort of immediately apparent to me. It's like fully admitting, when I saw this film in 2012, boy, was I just sort of unaware of my privilege of watching this because it felt different watching it the other night. And I highly, highly doubt it felt any different to, if you were Black watching this film when it came out. Just because I'm sure it must have been just as impactful, but with all these things kind of shoved in our faces in modern times, which is not going to go away just because now we're getting rid of, the guy in the White House. It just felt relevant in a way that it never did before. And maybe it probably should have.
Yeah, I think that, when this did come out, we didn't end up re-electing President Obama, and many white people at the time wrongly thought that we were making progress. And so to then have this, and we also, I think, I don't remember the exact year of 12 Years a Slave, but there were quite a few movies coming out around this time that reminded us that slavery, just as the decolonization of the mind is not complete, the deracialization and the right getting over slavery is a process that is definitely not complete and may never fully be completed. And so when we have these white people owning Black people and throwing around the N-word the way that it was originally intended, and by the way, white people watching, if you wonder why you can't say the N-word, it's because this is how it was originally used. And that's why we do not say it, because it has a history of being hurtful and meaning, and it's demeaning, but it also means I own you, right? And, we have like in let me see, Hateful Eight, we have Morgan Freeman's character calling the white people crackers, but other than that, we don't have a word like that for white people. So that's why you don't use the word, okay? You just don't. But it's also, we have these white people representing what is still very much alive in the minds of many white people today. And I hate to use the term many, but I am from the South, and it is true. Many people still think this way. And I grew up hearing my paternal grandfather using the N-word quite frequently. And it is hurtful to people of color. And so to have it used in its original sense, I think is, like in The Hateful Eight, is very deliberate by Tarantino to show us the historical origins of this word, right? In the way that specifically Leonardo DiCaprio's character humiliates and does whatever he wants with his slaves because he can. They are his property. And then you have people like Samuel L. Jackson's character here in Django Unchained, which is very different from his character in Hateful Eight, right? And this movie, he's basically what we call an Uncle Tom. He is an enslaved man who is weirdly attached in a loving way to his master, and who bosses around the other slaves and tries to humble them and make them be more appreciative of what they have. And that particular scene that you just put up too has a lot of racialist and racist commentary on, black people's brains are different from white people's, which newsflash, they aren't. But Leonardo DiCaprio, Mr. the Candy Man, right? Monsieur Candy, right? But don't speak French around him because he doesn't know it, and that'll just intimidate. That was like, oh my God, it's so. But I think that there's a lot obviously going on in this movie with how people of color and how white people navigated this pre-Civil War era kind of stuff going on, right? So I don't want to use the word antebellum because it's a little bit of a nice word, but pre-Civil War era realities, right? You have the kind of Uncle Tom character with Samuel L. Jackson. Then you have the dentist / bounty hunter, who's not quite the white savior figure. I like that Tarantino didn't make him that way, but he does teach Django, right? And he sticks up for him, and he calls him a freeman, right? And he protects him. So, and then you have Django himself, who is becoming educated and proficient in shooting, and also starting to have his own, stick up for himself and have his own life and a mission of getting his wife back.
Yeah, I really do want to sort of stress what you just mentioned about the fact that as much as we do sort of love Christoph Waltz's character, because he certainly seems like a good guy and he's a friend to Django, but he's not. He has some serious flaws, and I like the fact that he he does let Django down in the end, because he gives in to his absolute need for retribution, basically.
I think pride is his biggest sin.
Pride. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas Django is willing, even though he reaches for his gun a couple of times, he's willing to play the game and play along. He literally has to play a black man who's a slaver, and he still lets things go. And Dr. Schultz, I believe that, yes, Dr. Schultz could not. And so it also shows privilege on Dr. Schultz's part, where Django knows how, really, I think fully knows how real the threat of violence against him is, whereas Dr. Schultz, I think, is a little naive about it.
Yeah, because he's the one who's kind of losing his pool during there's this kind of journey towards the plantation, where, you know, it's almost sort of very Apocalypse Now-ish as they're going along this road, witnessing all these horrors on the way to the plantation, and you can see how disturbed Dr. Schultz is, and he even kind of at one point accuses Django of not keeping his cool, but in actuality, he's the one who's not holding it together.
It's projection on Dr. Schultz's part, and Dr. Schultz is the one who almost gives away the game, because you have, I believe it's Leonardo DiCaprio's character coming up to Django, right, and saying, you know, he looks a little green over there, you know, meaning a little sick. He looks, Dr. Schultz looks like he can't take it, right? And then what does Django do? He does a really good job of chalking it up to he's a foreigner. He's not used to this kind of American stuff, right? When we know that it's not just that. It's that he abhors, he's an abolitionist. He abhors the practice of slavery. So it's actually really Dr. Schultz who can't keep the act together. Whereas, I mean, Django is affected by it, but understands that he has to play along in order to get Hildy back, his wife.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just have to say, as despicable as Monsieur Candide is in this movie, man, DiCaprio just knocks it out of the park.
That's why Academy, this is why we don't like you, because you don't nominate this man for literally every role he's ever been in like he deserves. I'm just saying. He just a couple of years ago got an Academy Award. Just insane. He should have won like 7 or 8 by now. Yeah, the way in which he mentions a couple of times something called Southern manner, right? And someone who is from the South, I can tell you, it is very much a fake politeness, and it comes from a time of slavery, this kind of idea of being a good host in all of this. It's always a good host to white people, right? It's not until Dr. Schultz insists that Django should be treated well that he is, right? And we have that wonderful scene when they first come up and Samuel L. Jackson's character's name is Stephen, freaks out because a black man is on a horse, right? And Stephen himself is black, and this goes back to this Uncle Tom kind of thing. And Monsieur Candide says, well, now, you know, we're going to treat them well, you know, right? We're going to be nice to them. And then Stephen goes, so I was to treat him like a white guy. And you can tell Mr. Candy's like, oh no, like his face, right? The fear of, God.
Actually, that's earlier in the film. That's not with, that's not at Candyland. That's with Don Johnson's character. Mm-hmm. Which again, but really hits on this sort of fake Southern hospitality where it's like, well, why don't you all come and relax yourselves? And it's like, no, you don't get to present this sort of, you know, genteel, you know, sort of image of hospitality.
It's, pardon the pun, it's sugarcoating, because right, it's a sugar. I think it's they you know, because they call it Mr. Candy and everything, but it's sugarcoating what they're all about. And you know, I'm of course obviously going to have to do a little feminist analysis of how he has these women dressed up like French maids, and they're called ponies. That's a nice term for a sex worker, and he literally says, you know, oh, you know, this guy, whenever they have the fighting scene between the two men, who he owns, he says, oh, go get him a pony to lick his pole tonight. And it's just disgusting the way that they talk about women in this movie, and I have a visceral reaction to it every time. And just as the men are owned and used, right, the women are even lower on the ladder, right? They're, at least the men, their bodies are used for fighting, but they're not sexually abused. They're the ones actually sexually abusing the women as a prize for doing well in fighting, which is just, it's the white patriarchy that then sets up a patriarchy within the slaves, the people of color as well. So it just shit rolls downhill, basically, is the nicest, or is the easiest way to say it, is that, you know, just as Stephen is a slave, he is going to then want to elevate himself at least above the other slaves, right? And these fighting men are elevated at least above these women that are forced into sex work, right? And it's set up this way, right? In this Civil War society of you have the slaves that work the fields, the slaves that are in the houses, and then the bed slaves, right? You even have tiers within that. And Django himself knows this before they even go there. He says, she's pretty. They're going to make her into, a comfort woman, I think is how they use it. And so it's disgusting the way in which women are used in this movie and have been used historically, and also how men of color are kind of put into this role of being used themselves and then also using women. I'll go ahead and give a big chug after that. After that rant.
Yeah, it's God, there's so much that's heavy about this movie, especially in context of, what we've been going through. But that shouldn't disguise the fact that this is also a freaking hilarious movie, like a lot of Tarantino movies. It's just, my mind is automatically jumping to the end of the film after Django blows up the house, and just sort of the exchanges between him and Broomhilda, where he kind of looks back at her. He's got the hat on with the glasses and the cigar, and he's like, it's just, a great image. And and some of the humor is really uncomfortable. I know there's the whole sequence with the KKK where they're
Those
just
hoods.
utterly ridiculous.
Oh my God.
But
right, and it's like, who made this? It's Willard's wife, and then Willard finally, well, I'm leaving. I saw my wife spend out, well into the night making these. It's just.
It's like, I think we all agree the hoods were a good idea.
Yeah.
How about we forget them this time, and next time we go all out? And it's like, but it serves a purpose because it makes these people just ridiculous and the way they should be viewed, even though in a more realistic context, it's not that funny, but I think uncomfortable, being able to laugh at uncomfortable things sometimes helps.
Well, and it shows you that white men back then, and in many ways now, right, just happen to be born the right way. They are white men, and so they've been born into this system that favors them, that doesn't make them smarter. Just like if you're born into money and then, invest in the stock market and make a lot of money, that's because you were born into money. It doesn't necessarily mean you were smart. So, we finally see them for the idiots that they are. They're very mediocre, but they were born white. So they are seen as better, which is utterly incorrect. And we know that. But at the time, they were seen like Mr. Candy says, right? There's something in their brains that makes them special, right? It's disgusting. So disgusting.
Especially when you juxtapose those two scenes. It's like all of these stupid morons, and then you've got Candy talking about how the white brain is superior. It's like,
yeah.
And
Mr. Candy is a long line. He inherited all of that. He wasn't smart and invested well. He's like, I think his grandfather or great grandfather bought that plantation. He was just born with a silver spoon in his mouth, but he's taken it to mean that God has favored him and that he is superior.
Yeah. We'll just run through a couple parts that I love. I love all this stuff with Dr. Schultz and later with Django, where they're bounty hunting, like the early scenes where he's basically talking his way through having just shot the sheriff. And just, showing, the warrant and, and all that stuff. It's just Again, it's just the way Tarantino writes those moments. It's just sort of laugh out loud funny. But I don't know. What were some of your favorite parts of this film?
Oh, that's a good question. Even though it was brutal, I think that the scene where the guy gets attacked by dogs, the reason that I appreciate this scene is that there's that line where they ask like how far he's gotten. He because he was runaway, and they say, you know, this far. I forget how much he said, like 20 or I forget how far they say, and they say pretty good for a guy with a limp, right? Which lets you know he was so desperate to get out of there. And you have Broomhilda and Django have the R that's been seared on their face for running away, and this idea, you know, and Candy looks at him like, why would you want to do something like that, right? This idea that why would they want to leave when they have those 3 little dots in their head that makes them subservient, right? And it's, you know, this kind of idea of, you know, caged animals want to get out. Why wouldn't humans, right? But they don't see them as human. They see them as below human. And so there's this, what I don't want to say like about that scene because it was brutal, but what I think I appreciated about that scene was we get a very desperate man, just as Broomhilda and Django were desperate to run away. We realize, and we should realize, that most of them are not going to be like Stephen, where they're weirdly appreciative of where they are and they want to stay there. Most of them, given the chance, would run, right? And because of that, we need to recognize the humanity that connects us all, which is a need for freedom and for acceptance and love. And so even though that was a very brutal scene, also one of the things I like about it is that it disturbs Dr. Schultz later where he's having flashbacks about it. And he has that wonderful, and I think probably my favorite line in the movie is when he is having flashbacks about it. And Mr. Candy is like, whoa, well, you know, what's up with you? Thinking that it's because Dr. Schultz is mad because he ended up having to be out $12,000. And he says, you know, he was thinking about that scene with the dogs. And he says, you know, I was just thinking about, let me see if I can get the name of the author. I was just thinking about what
Alexander Dumas.
Yeah, Alexander Dumas would have thought about that, right? Who is the writer of, I believe, the Three Musketeers. Am I correct in that?
Because the slave's name was, or no, let me take that back. The man's name was D'Artagnan.
Yeah.
And so it's just that great moment where DiCaprio's like, you don't think he'd approve, and Schultz is like, no, his approval would have been doubtful at best. And
yeah, and then he says that
soft-hearted Frenchie.
Yeah, and he goes, no, he was black, right? And so there's this. Once again, it's Mr. Candy showing his ass. He assumes that all literature was written by white men, right? And so, and right, and to think that the reason he wouldn't
the look on his face when he hears that
Frenchie, like, really, that's probably my favorite scene in the whole movie is where the realization. I hate to use the term realization because I don't think he really realized, but Mr. Candy, right, was realizing that, oh wow, Black people can create art and literature too. And that they have created good literature that he appreciates. You know, and you kind of wonder.
I don't even think it registers with him.
That's why I say I don't want to use the word realize, because I don't think he got the point.
Yeah, I think he's confused by it.
Yeah.
And almost discards it immediately because it's something that he is incapable of acknowledging.
It kind of reminds me of S.E. Hinton, who wrote The Outsiders. People thought she was a man for the longest time because they couldn't fathom a woman writing such a famous American novel. And so there is this kind of idea of assumptions of greatness that specifically white men have. And yeah, also surprised that he was literate, right? So yeah, I think that's probably my favorite scene and one that I wanted to bring up. even though we do have limited time to talk about each movie. I think that that one scene says a lot about what this movie is trying to do. And then we have, right, and like Django ends up saying, is I'm that one man in 10,000, right? There's this idea this idea of greatness that you may not acknowledge now until it comes and smacks you in the face or shoots you in the face, right?
And again, we get all these wonderful violent scenes with this blood spraying.
And the way that he uses the white men as shields is just like perfect, kind of example of what this movie is trying to do.
Yeah, and then of course the final scene, just where he is unleashing, this final revenge, and where the way he will say dispatches Candy's sister, says, "Tell Miss Laura goodbye," and
then she goes, "Bye, Miss Laura."
Then he shoots her and she goes
flying. Yeah, I know the kind of slapstick comedy, physical humor of Tarantino's movies, especially Django Unchained, goes back to what we've been kind of talking about throughout the stream. It's the different types of violence, right? The violence against Black people who are owned is long, drawn out, visceral, disgusting, and just serious. And but then the violence against white people is comedic, and it's kind of quick, and there's blood spurts everywhere, and it's over dramatic, and it feels righteous, right?
Yeah. And just as a point of transition, because we need to get into the Hateful Eight, but I love the fact that Tarantino cast Walton Goggins in a smaller role in this, who's, delights in torturing Django at certain points in the movie. Oh God, we didn't even talk about the whole scene with the Australians.
Dang it, that was so funny.
I love the way that Django just like uses, it's just his brilliance, the way he uses the handbill from before, and manipulates these guys.
And just as the handbill comes around, in the Hateful Eight, the letter from Lincoln also comes full circle. Tarantino's really good at using these props that come back.
Yeah. But I mentioned Walton Goggins, who, has this small role in this, and then he moves on to play a very key role in the Hateful Eight, which I kind of like about Tarantino's movies, the way he uses cast members and sort of uses them to sort of explore the different aspects of humanity, and especially if you look at Samuel L. Jackson's role in Django and then the role that he plays in the Hateful Eight. So very different.
Yes.
But as far as the Hateful Eight goes, this movie is just like, even though it's intimate, it's small in terms of the locations, but it feels so huge, in no small part thanks to the filmmaking, the cinematography. It was, it has a very wide aspect ratio, so it feels like one of those old, Hollywood epics. And you said you think that this is probably his second best film.
Yeah,
right?
I saw this in theaters. So I also, anything I see in theaters, I usually like it a little bit more, just because you're really enthralled in the movie theaters. Like when I'm watching something at home, I might kind of also be on my phone, but in the movie theater, you feel really immersed. And I think what I liked about this movie a lot, see you later, Guilty. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
What I think I really liked about this is just the collection of men along the way, right? It's kind of like, you have Samuel L. Jackson's character, who is Marquis. He gets picked up, and then you get Maddox, who gets picked up, right? And it's kind of comical the way that it starts out, and then you have the two men or the man driving the carriage DB, and then you have John Ruth, who has this woman as his captor, Daisy, and there's a constant sexism toward her, saying she ain't no lady, calling her a tramp, calling her a hoe, all this kind of stuff. But she deserves it. This is coming from a feminist. She's not a good person. She's a part of this this gang, and she is wanted for all sorts of crimes. And what's interesting is that he hasn't just killed her, right?
Yeah, well, because he's the hangman.
Yeah, and they talk about that when they get to Minnie's haberdashery. I believe it was Minnie, right? Is her name?
Yeah. I'm sorry, but when they get there and Maddox is like, "Oh, haberdashery, I get it. That was a joke."
But it first starts out, like you were saying, you're talking about intimacy. First, it starts out really big. They're going along there's this blizzard. They're going along the road, but then when they get to Minnie's haberdashery, that's the only set for the rest of the movie. And that's why I think that this is his second best work, because the way that he worked, it feels like a play at that point with one, set. And so for him to be able to do so much with that, that really that's makes it, I think, a work of art.
Yeah. And I feel like I have to mention the fact that this movie actually got mixed reviews when it came out. And I know I personally found that shocking, because, and it's kind of what's kept me from just saying that this was my favorite movie of 2015. But at the same time, there's other great contenders for that from that year, like Carol. I absolutely adore that film. So that keeps kind of, edging its way to number one. But still, I love this movie because, it's so much is done in such a confined space. And I love that it's like a lot of Tarantino's work. It's built on these, this great dialogue and these character interactions. And the entire first half of the film, the version we watched doesn't have an intermission, but the 70 millimeter version did, and the point of the intermission is after that scene where Samuel L. Jackson shoots the Confederate general, and that whole stretch of movie is just dialogue and talking it out, and then that intermission point is where the movie turns and a lot of stuff starts to happen. But I just love that there's this whole big stretch of movie for the first half that is all about building tension and getting to know who these people are. But you don't know who's telling the truth, who's lying, and which, of course, practically all of them are lying about one thing or another.
One thing, yeah. And I think also, I noted down a couple of themes, obviously racism, a little bit of sexism going on, but I think one of the largest themes is war, and specifically the Civil War, right? These men are kind of reenacting the grievances of the war that we get the sense hasn't been over for very long. So we have Marquez, who fought for the Union, and I believe John Ruth also fought for the Union. And then we have the Confederate general, and then also Maddox, who fought for the Confederate side. And so we have these, we literally, the British guy literally divides the haberdashery so that those that fought on separate sides would, at least try and keep the peace, because they're going to be stuck there for a few days because of the blizzard that's happening. Okay, so the way that it's literally cut down, the middle, like Tarantino is obviously yelling at you that this is a major theme, this point of tension between the characters about the Union versus the Confederate.
Let me talk about Tim Roth for a second, who, and of course the character is putting on a fake accent this whole time because, again, playing a role, it's a performance. And just during that scene in the movie where he's dividing up, it's like he's being so very British with all these Americans. He's like, unless we want to restage the Battle of Baton Rouge, I suggest that we divide up the haberdashery.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's great. Like, each of these characters is despicable yet fun in their own way. And I mentioned that I love the point later in the film where he drops the act and we can hear his real accent. It's like, he's such a fraud.
Yeah, and many of them are found out for in one sense or the other, right? Marquis, turns out that letter from Lincoln that John is it Roth or Ruth? I'm sorry. I think it's Ruth. John Ruth really respects him, begrudgingly respects him for it. Thanks, Cam.
Bye.
So John, wanted to see this letter in the stagecoach when they were on their way to the haberdashery. So there's this kind of respect that's sort of given to Marquis. And then when he finds out that it's not real, he's mad about it. And Marquis says,
Beth.
right? Later, Beth. Marquis specifically says, right, when I showed you that, I got better treatment, basically. You might remember the line better than I do.
Got me on that stagecoach.
Yeah, got me on that stagecoach, right? So there's this idea of, once again, and this was like in Inglourious Basterds, this idea of disguise for a good cause, in this case for his own survival, and so that he won't be treated just like any other black person, which is how John otherwise treated him, right? And so it was his way of getting better treatment. And I think that's kind of interesting that their mask kind of starts to come off toward the end of the movie.
Yeah. And that whole thing with the letter, what I love about that is that, I mean, it's not like we're under any illusion that, John Ruth is obviously a son of a bitch. That's clear almost immediately, but there is this camaraderie between him and what's Samuel L. Jackson's
Marquis?
Marquis. There's this camaraderie between them, but the second that the letter is revealed to have been a fake, then all of Marquis's racism comes out, in full force. It's, it's the only reason it's, was masked before is because, he liked this one,
Exactly.
And
yeah,
it's just,
they all reveal themselves in one way or another to be assholes. So, and I think also what I found interesting too about this is the way that Marquis is the smartest, because he automatically suspects Bob, who is the Mexican man. And we don't really know why he's so suspicious. And he keeps going, "Are you calling me a liar?" Right? And he goes, "Not yet, I'm not." Right? And then later we find out he says, "Now I'm calling you a liar," is because he says, Minnie, who owns the haberdashery, used to have a sign over the bar that said, "No dogs and no Mexicans."
And that whole thing is so horrible, but
it's awful.
Just the way he delivers it when he says, why she took the sign down? She started letting in dogs.
Yeah, and it's like, oh God, and it's so bad because you're like, Marquis, come on, he's being, discriminated against just like you are, but at the same time, that Minnie's racism against Mexican people automatically made Marquis suspicious that she would have left a Mexican man, in charge of the haberdashery. So it made him think that he obviously didn't know Minnie that well, and that this is a ploy, and it was, but it's meant to also make you uncomfortable, I think, as well.
Yeah. And that, you go through this whole movie. I feel like you're sort of automatically on edge with all the characters. I'm trying to remember if I actually thought that any of them could, weren't in on it. But it just makes sense when you get to the flashback scene from earlier that morning, and and all three of those guys get off the stagecoach, and it's like,
Oh no.
it's like, of course they were all part of it.
Yeah, and they really try and ugly up Channing Tatum, which is impossible.
Now, I actually was pretty impressed by him.
Well, the teeth, they did pretty well.
Yeah, but I think he actually did a good job. I can't say I'm a particular fan.
I am.
But in fairness, I haven't seen that much of his work.
Yeah, I think he's talented. I just think he got kind of pigeonholed after the stripper movie. I'm sorry, I can't remember. The Chippendales movie. Matt? No.
Which I'm sure you didn't enjoy.
Oh, it was awful. I watched it for the cinematography.
But no, I thought he
Magic
did
Mike. Sorry, I just remembered it. Magic Mike.
I thought he did do a good job, and I love. I love it for multiple reasons, but the moment where he comes up out of the floor and there's that moment between him and Jennifer Jason Leigh's character and Daisy, and like that's the first time that we see her being tender towards anybody, and it lasts for a second, and then he gets his head blown off.
Right, and you're like, oh right, Channing Tatum's here. This is awesome. I can't wait to see what he does. Oh, he's dead.
Samuel Jackson's like, he was taking too long, so I helped him.
And I would say that one of the reasons that this is my second favorite Tarantino movie is actually the scene where you realize that he's under the floorboards and he says, like, say goodbye to your huevos, right? And then shoots him. That in the theaters got audible gasps from people, including me, because that's the thing is with these long drawn out monologuing, and you're so focused on the people in the haberdashery and who you should trust. Then all of a sudden there's some dude under the floorboards, like, what? I think it was a really good reveal, and it kind of, even though the action didn't really come until the end of the movie, it was really built up well. And I think that's why I like this movie so much, is that it's a really crazy reveal.
What's really great about that line is that it calls back to Inglourious Basterds in that scene in the bar when Stiglitz says, I think the line is, say goodbye to your Nazi balls. So,
yeah, and then we have in Django Unchained where he was threatened with castration, and then the guy who threatened him, Django ends up shooting his off, right? So there's a very big fear of castration going on in a lot of these movies.
But that scene where he fires from under the floor, there's slow motion in that scene as the violent, but my favorite slow motion moment is later on when Samuel Jackson is like, you're gonna make a deal with this bitch.
Yeah, the use of slow-mo is really really well done here, for sure.
And honestly, like, as much as Maddox is despicable, he really is, as as a Confederate, and just he's just what you would expect, basically. But the dynamic between him and Marquis in this film, it's so great, and that grudging respect that they gain for one another by the end of the film, is just, it's great to see character interactions with that. You got two people who couldn't possibly be more different.
And actually Maddox has probably one of my favorite lines from the movie, and this goes back to the theme of Civil War and how it's continued to be fought even when it's over. And he says, we weren't some foreign barbarians, coming to your walls. We were your brothers. So that's the problem with Civil War, is that it's, no war is clear cut. I'm not insinuating that, but Civil War is especially disheartening because all lives lost were technically, even though they were rebels, American lives. And so I think this kind of, in the end, Maddox and Marquis having that begrudging thing at the end is kind of them at a very basic level becoming brothers, right? Rather than
and that's
enemies.
sort of the thing about coming to that brink of death with someone. It's like, for better or for worse, all that other stuff does sort of, drip away, because when you're at death's door, it really doesn't matter if this is the person you're stuck with. It's just sort of about what you're going through in the moment.
I also found it interesting that Daisy automatically, she's covered in her brother's blood and guts, which is like, woo.
She's covered in so much blood throughout.
So much blood.
Because first it's John Ruth's blood, because after he's poisoned, he basically throws up all over her, and it's all this blood and stuff, which that scene is hilarious.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but
it is. It's a
so
little
funny.
comical, which is very Tarantino with this blood spurting. But I think what I found interesting about that is, right, her brother's dead. She's in this, and the first kind of after a while, after freaking out a little bit, the first thing she said is, "Well, now I'm the leader," right? So it's like, okay, it's kind of like with going back to Kill Bill, Lucy Liu's character Orin being like, I killed the leader of the Yakuza, I'm your leader now. It's like, I kind of want to be for female leadership, but not this kind of female leadership, It's kind of like what George R. R. Martin does, where he kind of gives you what you think you want, but then you realize you don't want it. It's like, that's very much Tarantino style as well.
I mean, God, she's so good in this, though. And she was nominated for an Oscar. I'm happy to say, one of the few Oscar nominations that the film got. The shame she didn't win, but at least she did get nominated. After the poisoning, and she's just waiting for it to all go down, the way she's tapping on the table, and just like, I'm sorry, it's so funny, it's great. And then when he's, the blood comes out of his mouth the first time, and he just turns to her, and she's like, when you get to hell, tell him Daisy sent you. It's great stuff. I'm sorry, I just realized, I don't mean to jump back and forth, but I just wanted to say with Django Unchained, just two things that I'm sorry that I forgot to say. First of all, Kerry Washington is amazing in that movie, and she's a great actor. And I think that was she did great in that part, but I think that also her range of acting made the part itself did not have very many lines, but she delivered. And those times when he hadn't gotten there yet, but he was seeing her kind of visions of her. And then second is, I can't believe I forgot this, I'm such a hip hop fan, the use of hip hop in Django Unchained. A lot of people complained about that, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I think that hip hop to this day has a lot of really good racial commentary, and I thought that it wasn't at all out of place in the film. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump back, but something about you were talking about the woman who played Daisy, and I was like, oh my God, I forgot to mention Kerry Washington. What's wrong with me? That's fine, because your mention of the music that plays over those scenes just gives me an excuse to pop up this shot of Django's absolutely amazing outfit.
Oh my God! And then whatever one of the women that Mr. Candy owns, she goes, your master makes you dress like that, and he goes, I'm free, and she goes, you choose to dress like that. That's great. It's so good. I love that movie so much. And Jamie Foxx totally owns that role. Anyway, I'm sorry, back to Hateful Eight. And Samuel L. Jackson, just comparing the two movies, though, Samuel L. Jackson does a complete 180 for this movie. He's definitely not an Uncle Tom character here. He fought for the Union, and he often, like to the Confederate general, mentions how the Confederate general, they had killed a battalion of all black men, right? And so he's calling everybody cracker, like he is having none of it, and he really stands up for himself, and he realizes that of all the people there, they might be able to create alliances with each other, but no one would create an alliance with him just because of the color of his skin. So he's the most on guard, and that makes him automatically the smartest in this movie because
and I love that when stuff starts to go down, with the poisoning and and all this other stuff, he's standing back. He's like taking all of it in and observing what's going on so that he can plan his move, which is incredibly smart.
And he doesn't necessarily react emotionally to things as much as he reacts to them, calculating kind of what he has to give up, what he does, like what if he does this, kind of what would the domino effect be. He's absolutely the smartest in this movie. And the way that Channing Tatum was just under the floorboards, I think that's probably my favorite kind of reveal in a movie. There are many reveals, but
because that's the thing that Marcus doesn't see coming.
Exactly. That's the thing, is he was overthinking everyone in the haberdashery. He didn't think that there might have be someone else there who's hiding, right?
Yeah. Well, especially the way that the whole situation is set up, because it's a very small area, so you figure, as an audience member, every sort of nook and cranny of that space, just like the characters do. So you're not expecting the camera to pan down under the floor to reveal, a new player in the story. And so it's very shocking, and it's a great turn. And the fact that then that happens, and then it goes to, the next chapter and it's flashing back. It's like, then you get this whole other section of the story that you weren't expecting. And I just love that we get to see, Minnie and the stagecoach driver and all these other characters.
And then you also realize that was a completely female run operation. And then all of a sudden when they get there, it's a completely male run operation. Right. So it's also this kind of dominance over a female-run business, which is, I find, interesting. And particularly then you have, and also to find out that Minnie is also a person of color too. It's kind of then interesting that she's so, but I mean, like, anyone can be racist, but against anyone.
Yeah, because this comes after the reveal of how she feels about Mexicans. So I think as an audience member, you just automatically
think you're a white person. And the way that she's so kind of beloved a little bit by kind of all the characters. Like there's Sweet Dave and Minnie, right? And they kind of sound like some really, and she's so nice and friendly, right? He's like, how many, peppermint sticks can I buy for a nickel? And then she's just so nice and like, ooh, 5. And she's so warm. And then also you notice how whenever John Ruth comes in and the coffee's terrible, you could tell he's used to much better treatment and much better beverages, at least with Minnie there, right?
Yeah, although I don't know that John Ruth has ever been there before.
Really? Huh.
Yeah.
You're right. It was just Marquis.
He's been there before. So.
And that guy's cover story about going to see his mom for Christmas, he really should have picked something better.
It's like, but you almost wondered, like, on my first viewing, I'm like, could he be telling the truth? It sounds so unlikely that maybe this guy is actually being the honest one, but it's like, nope.
No.
He's just bad at coming up with a story.
He's writing his autobiography.
It's like, couldn't you have spent a little more time planning this out?
Yeah, maybe like the easiest thing would be, I got a job in Red Rock. I mean, he doesn't even have to, but I think he wanted something that would be sympathetic, right?
But it's like, you're not a sympathetic looking guy.
Yeah.
You look like you're a bad guy. So, maybe pick something that fits with your appearance. But, sorry, Liam.
So many John sighs.
And Kira's not even in it.
I know.
Or any of these movies. Which, by the way, shouldn't she be
She should be in every movie ever created. But, she only has so much time and energy, so. what can you do?
So we'll go ahead and wrap this up, even though like we are going to be doing future streams about each and every one of these movies, because especially these last three films, we only got to kind of talk about and what felt like very surface level. I would love to dive into these and maybe have some guests on to talk about them, because they're great films and there's so much to sort of dive into. But before we wrap up, is there anything else about the Hateful Eight you want to mention?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, pretty much everything. Unless we were going to dive into like each scene, I probably can't pick anything else out in particular. And this is good timing because it's getting near 8:00, and so we all have something else to run off and go watch. But just wrapping up, why don't you just say again, what do you got going on?
Yeah, so I've got a lot of stuff coming up. I won't repeat the mid-roll, but if you follow me on Twitter and also subscribe to my channel, Amy Blackfire, AEMY, Blackfire with a Y, I've got a lot of great content coming up. And I write them as essays, so you can read them on my blog in essay form. But with each essay, I always have a video of me reading it to you. And sometimes, especially coming up, I'm going to have people on my channel to talk about it. And so, yeah, I do a lot of literary analysis. I am a PhD student of Chinese literature, so this is what I do. And I like to look at Western fantasy specifically through an Eastern lens. And I think not many people do that. And also, actually, I don't know anyone really in the Song of Ice and Fire community yet that I've met who does that. And I think that it really reveals a lot about what's going on in a lot of these series, and I think it betters our understanding of it. And yeah, those of you that are watching, if you enjoyed this, hopefully you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe. Jelwith, John Webster film. We're doing a lot of great stuff coming up. I'm especially excited for December, where we're going to talk about this one here's favorite movies in the whole world, The Lord of the Rings. Could you tell by his hat? Maybe he likes The Lord of the Rings. So I'm going to be sitting there on a panel surrounded by Tolkien nerds. It's going to be really fun.
Yeah, and if you're interested in that, don't forget, coming towards the end of this month on the 21st, I'm going to be doing an interview with author Doug Adams about his book, The Music of the Lord of the Rings films. And then after the week after that, we'll be doing another Knights of Kira stream about the film Colette, which I think you and I are very excited for. And Jared will be here too, all jokes aside. He is actually a real person, even though people will deny it. But he'll be back with us. And don't forget to tune in next week for our discussion on The Nightmare Before Christmas with our good friend Stephen Stark, and Lady Triple will be joining us too. So that's going to be a lot of fun. This will actually be our first stream together, Amy, where we have guests on. So
you'll have a full screen of 4 people going on. So yeah, I'm really excited for that. We all love that movie, and we're doing it right between Halloween and Christmas, so that we won't fight too much about whether or not it's a Halloween or a Christmas movie. Exactly.
And just saying again, as Amy said, if you like this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. We have endless amounts of stuff coming up. I'm about to unleash Amy on setting a schedule for next year, which I actually, now that I think about it, I think I had a dream of you giving me like a list of a schedule all the way through like July. I mean, year.
If you would let me, I would do that so the dream could easily become reality, but you pretty much gave me a 2-month range cutoff. So what can you do? When we were talking about me becoming the co-host, and you're like, yeah, I know what I'm going to do next week and the week after that. And I was like, and then like from Dude, Where's My Car? And then like, I need to know what we're doing for the next 2 months or else I'll freak out. Right. Just like on my channel, I have the rest of the year planned out. This channel, I had to do the same thing. So
Oh yeah, well, it's going to be happening soon because I don't think I can, because we're a couple weeks in now, so I don't think I'll be able to hold you back on
Oh my
that for
God,
much
Kate is so
longer.
right though. It is the Leslie Knope in me. Leslie Knope is definitely, definitely who what I'm also a blonde named Amy, so you know that's how it goes. But yeah, we've got a lot of really great content coming up, and we are very excited to share that with you all. And so if you hit that subscribe and hit the little bell, then you'll get a notification when we're about to go live, so you can catch these live. And if you can't, we hope that you watch them later. And we always appreciate your comments on Twitter and on YouTube as well.
Yep. Okay, so I guess that's it. This was a lot of fun. Again, the only thing wrong with this stream was I would have loved to talk about each of these films in so much more detail. But that's why I kind of like consider these focus on streams to be like, you know, and this is me being a Lord of the Rings nerd, but it's like the Silmarillion, you know, for future streams where it's giving an overview of the stuff and then we dive into all the details later on. So hope you guys all have a great night. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week.